TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 10.
Good morning, I'm Divya Kohli. Liz Truss may cut VAT by 5%, saving the average household £1,300 a year. It's her response to the cost of living crisis and a record rise of 80% on energy bills, and her plan if she becomes Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak's team has criticised the plan as expensive and regressive. No final decisions will take place until a new Tory leader is elected on September the 5th. Well, Boris Johnson has admitted energy bills will be eye-watering this winter and blamed Vladimir Putin. Writing in the Mail on Sunday, the outgoing Prime Minister claimed the Russian president is enjoying making bills higher with the war in Ukraine. But he insisted the UK's future will be golden despite difficult months ahead. Devastating floods in Pakistan have killed more than 1,000 people and displaced millions more. Heavy rains have hit the country since June. It is now appealing for further international support. And NASA say they plan to land humans on the moon by 2025 and build infrastructure to keep them there for extended stays. The first launch of the new generation Artemis rocket will take place on Monday, sending an unmanned capsule around the moon and back to Earth over 6 weeks. The space agency hopes the plan to build a moon colony will smooth the way for an eventual trip to Mars, as astronaut Randolph Bresnik explained.
If you think of going to the moon as, you know, a camping expedition and Mars being a further out camping expedition, you're not going to go out to the Alaskan wilderness with just going to the sporting goods store and buying a tent and getting your boots that are brand new out of the box. You're going to go to some local place that's a little closer that maybe you can come back to pretty quickly, come back home if your shoelaces break or something like that.
Jurgen Klopp says his team had a point to prove as they thrashed Bournemouth 9-0. It's Liverpool's first win of the season and equals the biggest ever win in the Premier League.
In the end, it was the perfect football afternoon for us, and a lot of different goal scorers, all these kind of things. So wonderful goals, fantastic situations, and we all know that we needed something like that, where we had bigger chance in other games and didn't use them.
And EastEnders will pay tribute to June Brown, who played legendary character Dot Cotton in the long-running soap. June died in her home in April, aged 95. Her character had been living in Ireland since early 2020, but news of her death will reach Albert Square before a funeral takes place. In her final wishes, she asked that her character got a final send-off after she passed. Now time for today's weather.
World News sponsors Talk TV weather.
It will be a fine morning for many this Sunday with spells of sunshine. However, towards the northwest of the UK, it is looking cloudier as some rain feeds in. Taking a closer look and across much of Scotland, it's going to be quite cloudy this lunchtime. Outbreaks of rain will be most likely towards the northwest with some heavier bursts. Southern parts of Scotland should be drier, and there may be some sunshine here, similar for Northern Ireland with a few sharp showers quite likely. Heading into England and into Wales, you can see that variable amounts of cloud will lead to some bright or sunny spells for most. Whilst the odd shower cannot be ruled out, it's more likely to stay dry. Feeling warm with temperatures getting into the mid-20s Celsius. The rain across Scotland will continue through the afternoon, staying mostly fine and warm elsewhere.
Times World News sponsors Talk TV weather.
I'm Tom Newton-Dunn, and this is Talk TV. The conversation starts here. If I had to describe Boris Johnson with 3 words, keeps us busy.
And a very good morning to one and all. Yes, I'm back. I had a week off last week. A huge thank you to Peter Cardwell for stepping in and filling in for me last week. I was away for a few days, but it is Sunday the 28th of August. Unbelievably, there are still 8 days to go. Is anyone else bored of this leadership contest? Would anybody else quite like an active Prime Minister sorting out the challenges we face? Well, I've got a massive show ahead today. In the first hour, I'm going to be talking about the energy crisis, my proposed solution to deal with it. We've got to obviously talk about the latest news across the channel, how many migrants are coming across yesterday, 915, the impact of the Albanian criminals on this whole issue. The second hour, I'm going to be talking again about the business impact for this energy crisis, the risk to businesses. No one's focusing enough on businesses. The potential for job losses is absolutely huge. And folks, you will not want to miss the third hour because, yes, the man who called me a disgrace for even daring to have Brian Catt on this show live 2 weeks ago, for whom there was about 500,000 views on the social media account. Yes, a gentleman called Gerald Cutney who called me an absolute disgrace for allowing Brian some airtime. He clearly doesn't believe in free speech. Well, he's coming on, and we're entitling that segment The Climate Brawl. Don't miss that, 12 o'clock sharp for about half an hour. That could be very entertaining. And, of course, we've got to look at the latest challenges in the NHS, where people's confidence in the NHS is sadly collapsing. That and so much more, of course. I've got great guests, MPs, climate catastrophisers, business people. And my simple question to you this Sunday morning, how concerned are you whether or not you can afford to pay these energy bills? How concerned are you that you can or cannot afford to pay it, and what sacrifices may you have to make? So many people are anxious, so many people are frustrated. Of course, this show works best when you give us a call, when you send me a tweet or a text. They're already starting to come in. You know the number, 0344 499 1000. Text me 87222 using the word talk, and tweet me at TalkTV or at Tice Richard, and I'll try and read out as many of those messages as I can, get to as many calls as I can, because that's what makes it a better show, a better Tice talk here on Talk TV. Well, yes, indeed. That music means that it's time for my Sunday sermon. And, of course, this week I have to focus on the issue of the energy crisis, because on Thursday I gave a press conference with what I believe is the necessary solution, an uncomfortable solution to this huge crisis, because this is not just a crisis of price, which it is very much a crisis of price. It's also a crisis of supply. And the solutions from the Lib Dems and the Labour Party and from the odd Tory that seems to be awake and paying attention rather than being on holiday is all very short term. But this crisis could go on for years and years. And so I introduced an emergency energy plan that can resolve this crisis, that can literally stop people dying of cold and hunger this winter, that can protect consumers, that can protect businesses, protect jobs, and that can also reduce inflation significantly. And if you reduce inflation, that has the knock-on effect of reducing the pressure to raise interest rates. Because I have no doubt, folks, and I say this with deep trepidation, that this is the gravest energy crisis that we face since the Second World War. I think it's worse than in the 1970s. And this is as a result, yes, of course, the war in Ukraine and the actions of Putin has a role to play. But be under no illusions. This is the result of gross negligence by politicians and by civil servants over the last decade and more. Nothing less. They dramatically increased the dependency on others. Let me just give you a few examples. In the last decade, we've increased by 400% the amount of electricity that we import. That's all very well when the sun's shining and when those countries will send it to us. But what happens if they can't? We've allowed our domestic gas production in the last decade to drop by 43%, even though we're sitting on huge energy owned by us all. we decided, not very smart to use our own energy, let's send all our money overseas to buy someone else's energy. Brilliant. Thanks for that, you clueless civil servants, you useless politicians. Because between 1980 and 2005, we were completely self-reliant. We were exporting energy. Imagine that. This crisis wouldn't have hit us anything like as hard if we'd continued to use our vast energy treasure. In the last decade, we allowed our generating capacity of nuclear and of fossil fuels to decline by 30% and more. Now, you just think, why would you do that? When you shut an old, ageing power plant, power station, is it really smart not to replace it with something else? Do you not think that occasionally things might break? Because that's where we are. The risk of breakdowns has dramatically gone up. In France, for example, where about 70% of their energy comes from their nuclear power stations, guess what? They haven't been maintaining them properly, so they've got major maintenance problems in France, which means we can't rely on importing electricity from France, as we have done every year for the last few years from France every winter. We can't rely even on Norway. They've got their own shortages. In fact, so serious is this that France this winter wants actually to buy electricity from us. But we haven't got enough of our own. Thanks for that, civil servants and politicians. And all of that is ahead of what you sort of know just is coming down the pipe. Imagine if we have a severe, cold, windless winter. Yes, it's called Sod's Law. And I'm afraid to say it, but that's how these things happen. We're literally having to pray for a mild but windy winter in order to keep the lights on and the gas flowing. I mean, unbelievable that a nation as developed, as technologically advanced as ours, is literally having to prey on the weather. And all of this is so totally unnecessary. I started talking about the energy crisis and the need to use shale gas last October. 10 months ago, I started on this. And I've been boring many of you ever since. But I think I've been proven right. The truth is the energy market has failed. It's no longer fit for purpose. And we have to declare what's called force majeure. It sounds a dramatic expression. It is. It basically means that the market has broken. The contract between the people and the energy producers has broken. It's failed. It's an extraordinary event, such as wartime. Well, there is a war in Central Europe, and we are in a global energy war. And what happened in the Second World War, for example, was the government had to take control of the pricing of production. And I'm saying, in this case, the government has to take control of the pricing of all of the UK energy production. Not the production itself, but the pricing of it. And that essentially it should revert to the average price that all the energy producers and generators that they received in 2021. When they were making profits, they weren't complaining back then, but that's what we've got to do. It's an extreme measure. As an entrepreneur, someone who believes in free markets, I feel deeply uncomfortable recommending this. But this, in my view, is the only solution that is durable and that solves the problems for so many people and so many businesses and so many jobs. And it can last as long as this global energy war lasts. And those energy producers in the UK that refuse, then I'm afraid they would have to face the nationalisation word, or if they reduce supply. I mean, this is difficult, uncomfortable stuff, but it has to be done. Because free markets work with smart regulation. And I'm afraid the politicians, the civil servants, the regulators, they have all failed. But what my solution would do is that it would immediately enable the domestic cap to come back down from over £3,500 a year, back down, I calculate, to about £1,750 a year. It would enable, for the first time, to be a cap on business. Some businesses are being quoted 80 to 90 pence per kilowatt hour totally unsustainable. Under my solution, the businesses could have a capped rate of about 35 pence per kilowatt hour. Not great compared to last year, but a lot better than the current alternative. And yes, there'd have to be some targeted help for the vulnerable, but it would be targeted. And this needs to remain, this uncomfortable, warlike response needs to remain until market conditions return. I don't know whether that's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, but it only returns to normal when the supply and demand balance returns. And so we have to essentially look at the other side of this crisis. I've been talking about the price, but what about the supply crisis? People are assuming that if the Ukraine war ends, that Putin will turn his taps back on. Why would he do that? He's enjoying the economic pain and suffering that we in Western Europe are experiencing. He's not going to turn the taps back on. He'll constantly blather on about, oh, there's maintenance problems in Nord Stream 1 pipeline, etc., etc. We have a grave supply crisis, and we have to resolve that. And in my view, that requires a national planning regime with local compensation so that we can dramatically accelerate more investment and extraction of North Sea gas, of course, shale gas, of nuclear facilities. That's the way to deal with this crisis. We have to have a national planning regime with local compensation. I'll be talking later about the uselessness of the Labour and the Lib Dem solutions. People like Ed Davey, who tells me he's proud to have stopped, tells us all he's proud to have stopped the fracking industry. That man is guilty of gross negligence. We should stop the renewable subsidies. We've got to get the supply side increased. This is what we've got to do. We've got to do it urgently, and folks, that requires leadership, it requires determination, and I hope Liz Truss will have that, but I'm not holding my breath. Here endeth my Sunday sermon. Call me 0344 499 1000 with your thoughts, your solutions, your concerns, or send me a messages. They're beginning to pour in. Coming up after the break, I'll be talking about the other crisis of the huge growth in illegal immigrants coming across the channel with Dr. Rakib Hasseen. Don't go anywhere. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk TV. Welcome back, folks, to Tice Talk here on Talk TV. Well, the switchboard has lit up, as has Twitter. Lots of messages. I'll get to those after the news at the bottom of the hour. But a nice message here from Wilkes World, who says, Richard, I recently criticised you as a same-old politician. Well, I am old. Yeah, that's true at 57. I was wrong, Wilkes says. Indeed, you do have something to offer the country and the people living here. Break the mould, Richard, break the mould. Well, that is what we are trying to do. We're trying to come up with different, alternative, better solutions to the crises we face. And we have to be prepared to talk about the difficult stuff. And not only is it about energy, but it's also about what's going on the English Channel, because the numbers are just growing and growing. We had a record number earlier this week at 1,295 in one day. Yesterday, we hear it was another 915. And we know now, because I broke the story 3 weeks ago about so many, the vast majority being, the greatest group being Albanians, with the proof that it was about 4 in 10. It turns out that was an underestimate, and that actually Albanians now represent over half the number of people coming across the channel. This is, let me remind you, a NATO ally and an EU applicant. Heaven knows why we want to join the EU, but there we are. Hardly a war zone, hardly a zone of terror, I would put it to you. Well, I'm delighted to be joined now by Dr. Rakib Hassan, who is a social policy analyst and writer. Rakib, thank you for joining me on Tice Talk this morning. It'd be nice to have some sort of good news to talk about, but I think, you know, we've got lots of challenges, but I guess what we need is some positive solutions. And, you know, we're prepared to talk about this huge challenge that is facing the country, because these numbers are growing. We've now got more people across the channel on boats in August than in the whole of 2020.
Well, it's absolutely remarkable, Richard. And as you said, those initial estimates which suggested that 4 in 10 people who were illegally crossing the channel into the UK originate from Albania, there are now sources which are suggesting that it is indeed over half, a majority of them originating from Albania. And as you say, Richard, we're not talking about a conflict-ridden territory here. The last time Albania experienced a conflict, I believe, I was 7 years old, back in 1997, the Albanian Civil War, which took place as, you know, Albania was looking to transition from being an ex-communist country to a market economy. So it's ridiculous, really, isn't it?
But the reality is actually much more scary and much more serious, because, of course, actually, if you're in Albania, you can get a cheap visa, you can come here, you can work here under the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Scheme. So if you can come here legally, why would you pay 10 times more to come here dangerously and illegally? That's why I fear that these are foot soldiers for the criminal gangs. The Daily Mail ran a piece, I think it was yesterday, about essentially the Albanian mafia, these gangs that are taking over in a very violent and brutal way so many of the drugs gangs, the criminal gangs in London and other cities. I mean, this is, you know, this is a serious threat to a peaceful nation.
Oh, it's remarkable. Richard, I'd describe it as a profit-making criminal industry. There have been multiple separate people smuggling infrastructures which are operating in the UK, which have been identified. And institutions such as the National Crime Agency have to be given the resources and the powers to clamp down on those people smuggling infrastructures. And as you say, there are legal routes, which you've clearly mentioned, which could be utilised. But ultimately, many of the illegal economic migrants that are coming here, they're going to be entering the black market, criminal enterprises. And you have described them as foot soldiers for these people smuggling infrastructures and criminal gangs which are operating in the UK. And everything has to be done to ensure that this doesn't go on.
Because,
yeah.
I mean, Priti Patel, because of what I exposed 3 weeks ago, she rushed out a new knee-jerk policy, which was that Albanians coming across the channel would be immediately deported. There'd be some Albanian border force officers coming over to the UK to help with this. How much confidence do you have that the current Home Secretary will actually be able to make this happen?
Well, I think it's worth seeing how effective this will be. But the reality of the matter is, Priti Patel has been Home Secretary for some time. And during that time, I wouldn't say that our border security has been up to scratch. There've been serious questions to be asked in terms of how effective our deportation regime is. The whole situation at the Channel very much undermines the credibility of our asylum system. Richard, you've done great work in this area. The reality is that the vast majority of these asylum seekers that are coming, they're on an illegal economic migration ticket. And what they're doing is actually what's happening because of this stream of people coming into the country illegally. Many of those people in the world, groups which are genuinely at risk of persecution and violence, especially young women and girls subjected to sexual violence and persecution in their homelands, they're almost being left by the wayside because our asylum system is overburdened the way it is with illegal economic migrants.
And the seriousness of the security issue is that these drug gangs, these criminal gangs, they are making huge profits, and of course they have to launder that money through the system. And so we know that Albanian gangs owned and ran hundreds and hundreds of car washes, but so great is the money they're making that they have to launder. That's not enough now, which is why there's been a complete sort of explosion of new Turkish barbers opening up and down the country. I mean, I talked about it a couple of weeks ago. I'm sure listeners and viewers will tweet in if they've seen on a quiet high street, again, new Turkish barbers appearing. This is another way of laundering money, and it seems that the establishments have got no idea about this.
Well, I think on these kind of issues, the public authorities all too often, they're playing catch-up on the Richard, and I do feel that part of this process of clamping down on these people smuggling infrastructures which have taken root in the UK, there needs to be greater regulation and tracking of irregular financial flows in the UK, and that needs to be part of the process for sure.
I mean, it really is, and in many of these outlets, these barbers and the car washers, of course, it's cash only, because that's how you launder the cash quickly.
Yeah, I mean, as I said again, what the UK government has to do, it needs to come up with a very regimented, targeted approach. There's no good saying that all too often I've heard that the government is saying it can do all it can. I don't believe that. And I think that what the government has to do, it has to allocate resources efficiently, understand what is actually going on and how are these people smuggling infrastructures in the UK, how they're operating, and then they'll be able to target them in an efficient way and then ultimately shore up our border security.
Well, Rakib, good policies. The question is whether it will happen. I am not confident based on the track record, but I guess I've got to be optimistic, and so have you. Rakib Hassan, thank you so much for joining us this Sunday morning on Tice Talk. I want your calls, your tweets, your messages coming in. There's loads and loads already. One message here. Richard, it's time to put the country on a war footing to get our energy as soon as possible. The country is waking up to the fact money speaks and the lack of it, and now is the time for all to shout out. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. You know the number, you know the messages. We'll get to those straight after the break. You are listening to the home of common sense. It's Tice Talk on Talk TV.
The thing that's really getting up my nose is how many of you moan about the fact that I have an opinion. I've been doing this for over 40 years. Of course I have an opinion. And if you get triggered or you get upset, you shouldn't watch. For the rest of us, an evening of entertainment live on TV and radio. Now, what do you want?
I don't want anything.
Thank you very much indeed.
Top class calls then.
This is Talk TV News.
Good morning, I'm Divya Kohli. Liz Truss may cut VAT by 5%, saving the average household £1,300 a year. It's her response to the cost of living crisis and a record rise of 80% on energy bills, and her plan if she becomes Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak's team has criticised the plan as expensive and regressive. No final decisions will take place until a new Tory leader is elected on September the 5th. Well, Boris Johnson has admitted energy bills will be eye-watering this winter and blamed Vladimir Vladimir Putin. Writing in the Mail on Sunday, the outgoing Prime Minister claimed the Russian president is enjoying making bills higher with the war in Ukraine. But he insisted the UK's future will be golden despite difficult months ahead. Pakistan is appealing for further international support after devastating floods killed more than 1,000 people and displaced millions more. Heavy rains have hit the country since June. And NASA say they plan to land humans on the moon by 2025 and build infrastructure to keep them there for extended stays. The first launch of the new generation Artemis rocket will take place on Monday, sending an unmanned capsule around the moon and back to Earth over 6 weeks. The space agency hopes the plan to build a moon colony will smooth the way for an eventual trip to Mars, as astronaut Randolph Bresnik explained.
If you think of going to the moon as, you know, a camping expedition and Mars being a further out camping expedition, you're not going to go out to the Alaskan wilderness with just going to the sporting goods store and buying a tent and getting your boots that are brand new out of the box. You're going to go to some local place that's a little closer that maybe, you know, you can come back to pretty quickly, come back home if your shoelaces break or something like that.
That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
Welcome back, folks, to Tice Talk here on Talk TV. Lots and lots of messages coming in there. We were just talking to Rakib Hassan about the illegal migrant crisis. Messages coming in. One here, and just to clarify, it says, Richard, how can you say that all Turkish barbers are gangsters, are laundering money? That's absolutely not what I said. Of course, there have been many Turkish barbers open for many years who do a fine job. What I'm saying is that there has been a huge increase, and more people are saying, how can they stay open if you never see any customers in them? Why is it that they want cash only? That's my point. And we know, because the National Crime Agency has said that Albanian criminal gangs has taken over the drugs market. So we know, and they have said that we know that they are laundering huge amounts of money. So what I'm saying is that it's one of the routes they're using, and we need to have the courage, even though it's difficult and uncomfortable, to say that some of this will be to do with laundering money. And for example, another tweet has just come in, which is, let me just find it here. I've just had in my little local Northamptonshire market down, we have a barber that's routinely open, who's routinely got more barbers than customers. What they're doing is they have hardly any customers through the day, it's cash only, and they then fill the diary with fake appointments. And that's how you wash the cash through. Clever. Is the penny dropped? That's what's going on. Another here saying it was a Turkish barber that's renamed itself a Chroma barber. Fine, they may well be genuine. But if they're empty most of the time, you've got to ask yourself, how do they make money? How do they stay open? Or are they laundering money? Let's go to Tony in Liverpool to see what he's got to say this morning. Hello, Tony.
Morning, Richard, and thank you for everything you did with the Brexit Party. I was behind you there.
Thank you.
Leaflet dropper. I was alongside you.
Thank you for your support. And I know it must be a terrible time in Liverpool after that horrific murder last week of the 9-year-old Olivia. It must be really difficult. But what's on your mind, Tony?
Yeah, sympathies go to that family, obviously. I agree with the sentiment that you started the show with regarding the 1970s, and I was saying to your producer, I think that this is a worse situation because now global debt is now heading towards $350 trillion this year. In the 70s, we had headroom to borrow. However, now, the idea that we're going to pull that lever, which is going to print more money and inflate the amount of cash saturated into the markets, is going to do even more damage in terms of sending outright inflation soaring north even further. We see, obviously, that we have the impending 18.6 or 19%, let's say 20% inflation. Who knows really what the real rate is?
Correct.
When we're talking like RPI, let's wait and see where it really is. I think the Bank of England have got no idea whatsoever what they're doing.
Tony, you're right that the wrong sorts of money printing can cause huge inflation, and we don't know where this inflation figure is going. But equally, if you target tax cuts that create growth, then actually you grow your way out of the crisis. That's what I'm saying. Now, actually, between the two world wars, we actually had national debt, which was, for 30 years, was at least 50% higher than current levels. So if it's targeted on growth, not just handouts, then we can afford more debt in the short term. In a business, you borrow to invest, but you borrow over the medium to long term. And that's what the government is not doing. You know, that's my point of view. You've got to create growth, and the way to do that, cut taxes on consumer goods for the lowest paid for small businesses, so that they can then be more productive, grow faster, and that's how we can afford these debt levels.
Absolutely. I would agree with that. There is such a thing as good debt and there's such a thing as bad debt.
Exactly.
One other thing that we could do, Richard, we've gone hell-bent on a service economy, following the globalist mantra. Now, when you do have a situation where you have an economic downturn, as we did in 2008, which really we never recovered from because we kept on printing money, then you could have relied on your manufacturing basis like the Germans have been able to do. They've balanced their economy far better than we have. So I agree entirely with what you're saying. There's good debt, there's bad debt, yes. But recently, in the recent decades, there's been far too much bad debt. Absolutely. That's
the point. There's good and bad debt. You're so right, Tony. Thank you very much for that call from Liverpool. With his concerns, you've got, you know, if we have to take on more debt, and I think short term we do, it has to be ensuring that we grow out of this crisis. And actually, I believe we can do that. And, you know, I wish the new Prime Minister, we all assume it's Liz Truss, well in doing that. But they've got to act fast, and they've got to recognise the gravity of this energy crisis. We're going to head from Liverpool down to Aylesbury, where Martin's on the line. Morning, Martin.
Good morning.
What's on your mind this morning?
Well, I'm amazed, you know, the serious issues we've got with power bills and with water. Why is there not a big discussion about nationalisation of these three areas? I'm amazed.
It's a great question, Martin, and there has been some discussion about it. And look, you know, as an entrepreneur, free marketer, I'm not overall a fan of nationalisation, but where there's a monopoly, like the water companies, or, for example, the gas pipelines, or the electricity transmission networks, where you've got a monopoly, then actually, if you sell all of that to private equity groups, foreign investors, which is essentially what we've done, then you are opening yourselves to be completely and utterly ripped off.
Which is exactly what has been happening, why the prices are so high. Because my understanding is the cost of gas itself has not necessarily gone up a massive amount.
Well,
when you look at the cost of the gas,
yeah. So the global price of gas has gone through the roof. I mean, absolutely through the roof. So it's up. If you look at some charts, and I'll try and put one up later. I mean, it's now about 10 times higher than it was a year ago. But if you look in the US, then actually the prices have only gone up by about 2 to 3 times because they use their own domestic gas, and that's been our absolute failing. We've exposed ourselves to having to import more gas than is necessary. That's the problem, Martin.
Okay, but obviously the government did jump in massively when we had the issue with the banks.
They did.
They jumped in very quickly. So why not now something short-term to help the population?
There you are.
One of the fortunate people, you know, the price increases are not going to destroy us.
You're right, Martin. They do need to jump in. My concern is that this isn't short-term. This is until the supply crisis is sorted out, and that could be 3, 4, 5, 6 years, depending on what Putin does with his gas taps. Martin, thank you so much for your call from Aylesbury. We're going to head quickly to Kent, where Richard is waiting before we go to the break. Hi, Richard.
Hi, Richard. I like your policy. I like the threat of nationalisation to these greedy energy companies, but I also think we need a root and branch investigation into the civil service and the politicians as to who put us in this position in the first place. I don't like Boris Johnson's policy with Ukraine. I don't think war is going to get us through this. I think we need, for once in our history, to keep out of a war and maybe take a neutral position, benefit from it like countries like Sweden and Switzerland did during the Second World War. I have absolutely no faith in this government whatsoever. We need an alternative. I don't like it when you say a few decent Tories. I don't think that does your electoral chances any good, because if it's a decent person in the Conservative Party, they would have left it by now, because they are responsible for just about everything, every facet that's going wrong in this country, whether it's military, the police, education, looking after the elderly, the NHS, everything. They are responsible for everything, and we need a massive political sea change in this country.
Richard, you're right that the Tory government is responsible for all of those failings. They've been in charge of 12, but there's an optimist in me that wants to see the best, you know, in some people, and that's why I say it, albeit, you know, I've got just deep concerns about what they've done to our country. It really is just so shocking.
Richard, if you're a welder or a glass blower or a blacksmith at the moment, a self-employed guy, imagine what you're looking at the moment with energy bills, with your mortgage going up. Now, Tory politicians don't meet these types of people, and I'm not saying Labour are the answer, they're even worse. But we need a party, we need to rinse the Marxists out of the civil servants, out of the civil service, and our political party, because I believe there's a lot of soft Marxists in the Conservative Party as well. Who's going to apply the pressure? Is it going to be you and Farage?
Well, we're certainly battling. No one's saying it's easy, Richard, but we are battling on, and we will keep doing so. Thank you there. That's Richard from Kent. Stay with us. We've got Robert Halfin, Tory MP, after the break. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk TV. Welcome back, my friends, to Talk TV. Lots of messages coming in, some supportive and some less so, such as this one, which is anonymous but says, "What's wrong with cash, you stupid man?" Well, look, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with cash. What I'm saying is if you have a cash-only business, and that's what we're seeing with lots of these barbershops, they all say cash only. That's how you launder money. That's what I'm saying about cash-only businesses. We all like a bit of cash in our pockets. But if it's a way of laundering money, then it becomes a bad thing. Anyway, I'm delighted to be joined by my next guest this morning, who is the Conservative MP for Harlow, who's the chair of the incredibly important Education Select Committee, Robert Halfon. Very good morning, Robert. Thanks for joining me this Sunday. So you wrote an article this week, obviously, about your key focus on the exam boards. We had the GCSE exams results on Thursday, but quite a lot were delayed, and that's the first time I can ever remember that, where they weren't actually ready to release the results.
Well, sadly, it has happened before, but this year is particularly bad. For BTECs, there were thousands of students waiting for their results. For Level 2, which came out this week, there were something like 7,000 students who had their results delayed. I thought this was unacceptable. I do think it's symbolic of how we look at vocational education in our country, because if this had happened to A-levels and GCSEs, everybody would be up in arms. There'd be all kinds of calls for debates in Parliament. But everyone, as usual, forgot thousands of students who are doing important vocational qualifications.
And you make such an important point about, vocational education. It's so important. There's no question we undervalue it. My concern, Robert, is it's just another sign of things in parts of the public services that just aren't working. And, it's very easy, we throw around this sort of label, broken Britain, but more and more people are concerned that just different services for the public, just what is working well in this country at the moment in the public services?
Well, you're right, absolutely, that the public services in many areas are just not working. I have work every day to try and get passports for my constituents, or whether it's DVLA licences or trying to get GP appointments. On the particular point on education, Pearson and OCR, they're private exam boards. They get paid millions of pounds by the education authorities in order to provide a proper service, and they should do. I had a meeting with Pearson last week. They told me they knew that there would be delays early in July, and I said, well, why couldn't this have been sorted out? And my own view is that they should, if they don't get their act together and absolutely pledge that there won't be delayed results next year, they should lose their contracts with the schools.
Well, perhaps they should lose some fees this year. I mean, so that bit's broken, or partly broken. I talked earlier, Robert, about the thing that's on most people's mind, which is the fact that the energy market is completely broken. In my view, it's no longer fit for purpose. And, so many people are literally terrified, which brings us on to what the new government is going to do about it. Do you think that either of the two leaders, and I know you're supporting Rishi Sunak, who is not the bookie's favourite to win, do you think either of the leaders actually understand the gravity of the fear in people's minds, and what do you think they should do about it?
Well, there is real fear out there. If I could just give you two examples, a fish and chip shop in my constituency, their energy bills have gone up from something like £1,500 to over £3,000. Their takings are down by £5,000 a month because people can't afford to go or are buying smaller portions. My local GP surgery, their gas bills going up from £10,000 to £24,000. That's not even including electricity. And, you imagine all that money that could be spent on frontline services. Further education colleges, I've been told by the Association of Colleges that some of them are facing 300% increases in their energy bills overall. So that means less teachers, less lecturers, and just money spent on energy bills. So it is a serious problem. I do think, and one of the reasons why I supported Rishi Sunak, I do think he's got some policies on education, good policies on education, which we might discuss. But on the cost of living, he did act a few weeks ago when he was Chancellor, spending £37 billion. Now, what does that mean in reality? it means £1,200 to 8 million of the most vulnerable families, a £400 energy rebate to everybody, £150 off the council tax, 5p off fuel duty.
But that package, but Robert, that package was when the cap went up to 1,971, right? It's now doubling. I'm glad that you've mentioned about businesses. I think we've got an image of a pub called the Rose and Crown, who's been quoted 90 pence a kilowatt hour, £6,200 a month. I mean, you know, this is like 8 times what it would have been last year. We've heard nothing from the Conservative Party, nothing from the Lib Dems, nothing from Labour about help for businesses.
Well, I do. Again, I agree with you. And this is my personal view. I'm not speaking for anyone else, but my personal view. I've seen your proposals from the Reform Party. I've seen others. Is that what there needs to be is different tariffs. So you'd have a small business tariff, which would enable them to avoid the huge increases in energy bills, because otherwise they'll go under, will increase unemployment. There should be an essential public services tariff for schools and hospitals and GP surgeries. And there also needs to be a social tariff for those people who are struggling and just about managing. And when I'm talking about just about managing, I'm thinking again of my Harlow constituents. If you look at a couple, one member is working all day, comes in, and the other part of the family goes out and works in the evening. I've got constituents who are working 7 days a week in cafes just to keep their head above water. So we do need a social tariff that reaches the very poor, but also those just about managing as well.
But this crisis could go on for years, Robert. I think people are being naively assuming that this is a temporary matter for a few months and that Putin will turn the taps back on. Nobody's talking about the fact that he may not. He's enjoying the Western European economies suffering and struggling and the pain we're all going through. Why would he turn the taps back on? He doesn't need our cash anymore.
Well, he won't, and what we've got to do, and we've made mistakes in the past, is actually secure our energy supplies. We've got to stop what I've said for a long time, balancing environmentalism on the backs of working people. So I support fracking. I wish we had done that and not had a so-called moratorium on it. I once said to the Prime Minister in a meeting that I said if you needed to frack in the back of my garden, I'd be very happy. If you did so. He looked a bit shocked. We need to increase our oil and gas supplies. We need to get our gas and oil storage facilities back up and running.
We do, Robert, and I'm delighted to hear you support shale gas. I've been talking about it for the last 10 months. But both leadership candidates say with local consent. But because of the well-funded environmental lobby groups, you won't get local consent. You have to have a national planning regime for matters of critical national infrastructure, surely.
Well, I think what they've said is there would be incentives for local communities, and that might be financial incentives, which I think would be right. So you'd have extra housing, extra infrastructure built alongside shale gas. But absolutely, we need a national plan for energy that increases our fossil fuels, because we've got to live in the world as it is, as well as the world we may like it to be in the future. Of course, supporting renewables and solar and all that sort of thing. But we've got to make sure that we are independent as far as possible and can supply our people with energy, because it's not right to say to people, well, I'm sorry, you have to have a shower that is a few minutes less, or you can't boil your kettle. You know, what kind of country are we supposed to be? We're living in the 21st century.
And Robert, just whilst you've been on, Michael in Northumberland has said, Richard, please ask Robert to try living on the minimum wage and not an MP's salary with the expenses, and see how much, how difficult it is. And that's the point, isn't it? But
it is. I see this in my constituency all the time, and that's why I've always campaigned to cut the cost of living. There will be, the £1,200 package for vulnerable families will be working its way through. There's also a national insurance tax coming for 70% of households. The fuel duty has been cut. Of course, I want them to do more, but there is some money coming through. But I have no doubt that people are struggling. I talk to people every day. I get emails every day. The cost of living is the biggest challenge facing the nation. We've got to get inflation down. We've got to cut interest rates, because otherwise mortgage rates will just go up and up. But we do, to be fair, have to deal with the national debt, because the debt interest alone over the coming year is £85 billion.
But I've got a solution for that. But for 30 years, Robert, we had 50% higher debt between the two world wars than we've got now. If you fix the interest rate on all the QE debt, you can deal with that risk.
Well, I've always believed in good housekeeping. The overall debt is £2 trillion. To me, that is a huge sum of money. What happens if there's another crisis around the corner? What happens if the war that Russia have waged on Ukraine gets worse and becomes a conflagration across Europe? We have to get down the debt.
The way to do that, surely the way to do that is grow faster, Robert. Unfortunately, I'm running out of time, Robert. I've got to go to the news, but thank you so much for your thoughts there. That's Robert Halfon, MP for Harlow, done some great work trying to help children, protect children, chair of the Education Select Committee. Stay with us. We're going to be talking about the energy crisis for the whole of the second hour with some great guests. So we'll be going to your calls, your messages, because this is such an important crisis. Loads of messages pouring in. I will get to these, such as the one from Jackie, who says, can you explain why we're not developing more North Sea oil, but importing from Norway? You're right, Jackie. It is willful malfeasance, not just negligence. Stay with us. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk TV.
On TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 11.
Good morning, I'm Divya Kohli. Liz Truss may cut VAT by 5%, saving the average household £1,300 a year. It's her response to the cost of living crisis and a record rise of 80% on energy bills, and her plan if she becomes Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak's team has criticised the plan as expensive and regressive. No final decisions will take place until a new Tory leader is elected on September the 5th. While Boris Johnson has admitted energy bills will be eye-watering this winter and blamed Vladimir Putin. Writing in the Mail on Sunday, the outgoing Prime Minister claimed the Russian president is enjoying making bills higher with the war in Ukraine. But he insisted the UK's future will be golden despite difficult months ahead. Devastating floods in Pakistan have killed more than 1,000 people and displaced millions more. Heavy rains have hit the country since June. It is now appealing for further international support. NASA say they plan to land humans on the moon by 2025 and build infrastructure to keep them there for extended stays. The first launch of the new generation Artemis rocket will take place on Monday, sending an unmanned capsule around the moon and back to Earth over 6 weeks. The space agency hopes the plan to build a moon colony will lead to a trip to Mars, as astronaut Randolph Bresnik explained.
If you think of going to the moon as, you know, a camping expedition and Mars being a further out camping expedition, you're not going to go out to the Alaskan wilderness with just going to the sporting goods store and buying a tent and getting your boots that are brand new out of the box. You're going to go to some local place that's a little closer that maybe you can come back to pretty quickly, come back home if your shoelaces break or something like that.
Jurgen Klopp says his team had a point to prove as they thrashed Bournemouth 9-0. It's Liverpool's first win of the season and equals the biggest ever win in the Premier League.
In the end, it was the perfect football afternoon for us, and a lot of different goal scorers, all these kind of things. So wonderful goals, fantastic situations, and we all know that we needed something like that, where we had bigger chance in other games and didn't use them.
And EastEnders will pay tribute to June Brown, who played legendary character Dot Cotton in the long-running soap. June died in her home in April, aged 95. Her character had been living in Ireland since early 2020, but news of her death will reach Albert Square before a funeral takes place. In her final wishes, she asked that her character got a final send-off after she passed. Now time for today's weather.
World News sponsors Talk TV weather.
It will be a fine morning for many this Sunday with spells of sunshine. However, towards the northwest of the UK, it is looking cloudier as some rain feeds in. Taking a closer look and across much of Scotland, it's going to be quite cloudy this lunchtime. Outbreaks of rain will be most likely towards the northwest with some heavier bursts. Southern parts of Scotland should be drier, and there may be some sunshine here, similar for Northern Ireland with a few sharp showers quite likely. Heading into England and into Wales, you can see that variable amounts of cloud will lead to some bright or sunny spells for most. Whilst the odd shower cannot be ruled out, it's more likely to stay dry. Feeling warm with temperatures getting into the mid-20s Celsius. The rain across Scotland will continue through the afternoon, staying mostly fine and warm elsewhere.
Times World News sponsors Talk TV weather.
I'm Tom Newton-Dunn, and this is Talk TV. The conversation starts here. If I had to describe Boris Johnson with 3 words: keeps us busy.
Welcome back, my friends. We have raced into the second hour of my show. I don't know where time's gone, but so many messages and coming in. And calls, it's hard to keep up. But one here says, thank you, Richard, for bringing Ed Davey to our notice, who was the energy minister in the coalition government and introduced the unjustified green subsidy. Why did he think it was right for the consumer to pay for the introduction of an unsustainable business model is beyond belief. Well, I've just got, I touched earlier on about the supply crisis, which is sort of part of the energy crisis we've got. And I've got a little video of Mr. Ed Davey. Sorry, I think he's now... Is he Sir Ed Davey? I think he is. Playing how he sort of is proud of his role in causing this supply crisis. Just listen to this.
Sure. Ed, you said that fracking is not evil. You said that when you were Energy Secretary. Have you changed your mind? Is it evil?
I think we should ban it now, but there's reasons why I've changed my mind. First of all, the success of our renewable policy, particularly in offshore wind, means we're not going to need anywhere near the amount of gas we did before. Moreover, it's really, really clear that we can change the whole nature of our economy quicker. And there's more evidence that we don't need this gas. So, for example, Carbon Track Initiative, my favourite green NGO, have shown we've already got 4 or 5 times the amount of fossil fuels in terms of oil, gas and coal than we could possibly burn and stay safe within 1.5 degrees. So I'm very, very clear. Let's ban fracking.
Unbelievable. I mean, there you have it. A senior politician who is proud of having dramatically reduced the ability to have our own domestic supply. Shale gas is well used in America, over 600,000 wells, and guess what? Their gas price is about a quarter of ours. Well, I'm delighted now to be joined by my next guest, who is the former Chief Executive of Energy UK, former Secretary to the Treasury, Angela Knight, who is very well informed in all matters to do with the energy markets. Angela, a very good morning to you. Thanks for joining me on Tice Talk. I mean, we are in unprecedented territory. I actually have termed it essentially a sort of force majeure event, totally unforeseen, totally unprecedented. The market is broken. It's no longer working as you and I, as sort of free market believers, believe in. I think it's that serious.
Yes, I agree with you. It's very serious, and I don't think that anybody should pretend otherwise. Equally so, that doesn't mean that we haven't got some way forwards, but it does need some really good decision-making from now on. I know it was interesting you showing the Ed Davey clip, because he was Secretary of State for Energy. I have to say, Ed Miliband was also very much involved in energy as well, and some of the green levy issues. And Nicola Sturgeon, I note that she has also been engaged promoting wind. So what I'm trying to say is not spread the blame, but that there has been a sort of groupthink across all political parties. And part of that groupthink has forgotten about what I call the transition, and that is how you get from us being dependent on a lot of coal-fired generation and some gas through to renewables. And there seems to be a complete misunderstanding that you could replace one, reliable, it'll work all the time power station by an offshore wind farm. You can't, because, of course, the wind doesn't blow all the time. And so, the big gap has been forgetting about energy security, and some of those decisions that needed to be made were difficult and hadn't been, of which fracking is one. And another, which still has got to be properly made, is nuclear. But I don't mean these huge, great power stations, which take 10 years and 20 billion or whatever. I mean the small-scale, repeatable nuclear power stations, which can be built in about 2 years, same design, cost about 2 billion, which means that you'll get private investment in, and it won't just sit on the, on the taxpayer.
But to do that requires real leadership, and it requires a national planning regime to treat these items of critical national infrastructure as a national security issue, as opposed to, because if you rely on a local consent, you and I know that that's going to take many, many more years, and we just haven't got that time.
Yes, I entirely agree with you. And there is some form of a framework set up. What I can't tell you is how good it is. Equally, of course, every time you build a power station, you've also got to put all the national grid infrastructure in place as well. So the obvious thing to do is put the small-scale nuclear on the same side as the big nuclears, including those that we've shut down, because you've got the infrastructure there. But as I say, at the same time, we've got to get to that point, which means things like pulling more gas now out of the North Sea. It means, and apologies for saying this on a Sunday morning, a bit early, altering the algorithm on the electricity pool so it stops the gas price pulling up the total price of the pool. Detach that and you'll bring down our wholesale cost of electricity by about 20%. And it also means doing a lot of subsidies for people and business in the interregnum.
So, but this is the point, though, and I get that technical point about the markets, but nobody from any of the mainstream parties have been talking about the impact on businesses. I highlighted earlier just one pub. I mean, you know, so many pubs around the country are thinking of closing when their current tariff comes to an end. Nobody's talking about a solution for businesses. I mean, if this crisis goes on for many years, and I fear it will, because I don't see why Putin's going to turn the taps back on, then the government can't afford to subsidise everybody for 4, 5, 6 years as on the way that the Labour and the Lib Dems sort of seem to think you can for a few months.
Yes, I mean, one has to recognise that there's only three ways of paying for all this. One is called the energy users. The second is called the taxpayer, you know, both business and individual. And the third is called some combination of the two. So we do need to be realistic about what we do and how we do it. Now, there's a very good proposition that has been put up by some of the suppliers. And I detach, of course, the suppliers from those who pull the oil and gas out of the ground, because they're the ones, the oil and gas people, are making the money. The suppliers, as we all know, aren't making money, and as you know, nearly 30 of them's gone, or 30 have gone bust already. But they have put up a proposition which puts in place, you know, a big safety net, which allows a lot of the pricing to be kept there or thereabouts for a 2+ year period, and then spreads the consequences over 10 to 15 years. That's not a bad idea, because in those 2 years, not only will we see settling within the wholesale markets, but we'll also have the ability to make some changes and modifications underneath, such as dramatically improving our own energy security, and so be less dependent on what happens in the wholesale markets. The second thing we can do is it's well worth remembering that whilst the VAT is 5% for us domestic users, it's 20% for business users. Businesses predominantly use electricity. So if you reform that wholesale market calculation, that algorithm, that brings down that wholesale market and can do by about 20%. And then you shift the VAT, even if you shift it down to 5%, you've suddenly done something very substantial for business. And I would urge that those are the sorts of actions that take place. And shift green levies either onto the taxpayer, suspend them or leave them. I'm not entirely sure about that, because there's a whole contractual piece underneath it, which is quite complicated. But equally, what we do need to really strongly think about is that this is it's broadly an international crisis, but particularly those countries impacted are Europe and Japan, and we're kind of fighting against each other at the moment, bidding for our own natural gas.
Tragically,
it's an international discussion to be had.
Completely. I describe it as nations scrabbling for energy, rather like we were scrabbling for PPE just over 2 years ago. And,
exactly.
and I get the point about, you know, the 2-year idea. That works as long as it only lasts 2 years. But if we don't have the leadership and the rapid decisions to increase the supply, and we suddenly find 2 years goes into 4 years, I'm afraid that solution, it isn't sustainable.
I would agree that. All this and everything that I have said is predicated on both a political will to make decisions and the proper information advice coming through to ministers. You can't just say it's a minister's problem, because you have to have a civil service that provides the information, that does the calculation correct. And frankly, there's not enough scientists and engineers in that department at all.
That's depressing to hear, Angela. Thank you so much. I'm afraid I don't share much confidence about that happening. Angela, that's fantastic. Some great information and thoughts there from Angela Knight, someone who really understands this market, with some ideas for solutions, some of it quite technical, but it is all super, super urgent. We're just going to be taking a call in a second. Lots of messages coming in. This one from Stephen, who says, Richard, you've got a one-frack mind. Do you know, Stephen, you're probably right. I've got a sort of one energy mind at the moment because I'm so concerned about the nature of the crisis. And that is a huge thing. But there was another one here about the failure of the Labour government to replace closed nuclear power stations with new ones, which is absolutely right. Another one here from, who's this, from Bill in Wales, who says, may I thank you, Richard, for keeping shale gas in the news. It's so obvious we should exploit this resource. If Boris had supported it and not postponed development, he would be a hero, both in the UK and across Europe. Bill from Wales, you are quite right. It will take a few years, but it requires leadership. It requires absolute determination. Let's head down to Hampshire, where Guy's on the line. Hi, Guy.
Hello, Richard.
Hi, what's on your mind?
Well, basically, it's your idea of the nationalisation. Clarify who you're talking about, because you've got two people involved in all of this. You've got the producers, the Essos, Shells, BP, etc., and the suppliers, you know, British Gas, Southern Electric, and all the rest of it. Now, the suppliers are buying the stuff on the open market. The producers are the people who are raking in the profits, but that's because they're selling on the open market.
Yes.
And a bit like the house prices, you know, if you bought a house for 10 grand and it's now worth 200, what do? You sell it at the market price.
It's very simple, Guy. What you do is, by law, you force the UK producers only to sell domestically to government-approved UK retail suppliers. You've still got to buy some gas on the open market because we've got a shortage, but at least you then control the price. That's what happens in wartime.
Yeah, but the producers are international companies. So if you're talking about Shell, for example, which is a Dutch company, yes, it will have a UK division, but the UK, guess what Shell is going to do as soon as you start talking about nationalising the UK division? It's going to pull out the UK.
No, what I'm saying is that they've got to comply with the law to sell only to the UK and not to reduce supply. If they don't do that, then they'll be nationalised. But the flip side is, the upside for them is...
But you won't be able to nationalise them. You will not be able to nationalise them.
You can nationalise UK assets, and the flip side is you scrap the windfall tax, so you incentivise them to invest more in UK assets.
I don't disagree with you all, at all. But the problem is, it's a bit of it appears to be a bit of a short-term solution. This is a supply issue, and it's because, as you liken to, sorry, the wind's just come up. I hope you can still hear me. The PPE, you know, the whole world was scrabbling for PPE.
Correct.
It was just made in one country, China, and obviously the market price went through the roof. So this is a supply issue, and kudos to Boris, who did go over to the Middle East and try and get them to increase supply, which would have eased it.
But unfortunately, there's a constraint on the number of ships of the liquefied natural gas market, so that doesn't work for gas.
That's my profession.
Yeah, so you know it. Guy, thank you so much for your thoughts there. Look, I'm not saying it's easy, but what I am saying, it's necessary, and we've got to find a way, because this crisis is so severe, and we need a solution that is durable for the extent of the supply crisis. That is my point. None of the stuff is easy, and for free marketers and for entrepreneurs like me, it's really uncomfortable. Stay with us. We'll be taking your calls. Lots more messages coming in. You're listening to Tice Talk. It's Talk TV. Welcome back, my friends, to Tice Talk here on Talk TV. Lots of messages coming in just before we go to a couple of calls. Sally in London, absolute brilliant message here. Richard, would giving householders in fracking areas a special discount of maybe 35 to 40% cheaper gas bill reduce the pressure on them by the green lobbyists? I think it's only fair for having them work near them, and this would render the green mob impotent at the same time. Sally, you absolutely hit it on the button. That's what I've been recommending for some time. Anybody who is within a certain radius of any form of critical infrastructure, whether it's a power plant, whether it's a shale gas pad or well, should get a discount for the duration of the life of that plant, whether it's 5 years, 10 years. And that actually, I think, is fair and reasonable. Something similar happens in the US, and that seems to me to make eminent sense. So, Sally, thanks for raising that. And then there's another one here, which I will just try and find, about the oil and gas industry, who says that it's so difficult to get new licenses in the North Sea. And that is the point, isn't it? And that's what we've been talking about. We've got to have national planning regime that grants the licenses, grants the consents, obviously subject to the usual regulations, but people have got to know that they can get this stuff done. Let's go to Essex, where Lee's on the line. Hi, Lee.
Oh, hi, Richard.
Hi, what's on your mind this morning?
Right, yeah, my concern is there's no mention of electric anywhere. It's all about the gas. We all know why the gas is going up in the world, and you know, we've got wind, nuclear, solar. We've got solar being fed back from households. But why is that going up at the same rate as gas when there's no additional costs in generating that power? They just can't justify it, and nobody's mentioning it, Richard.
You're absolutely right, Lee, and it's a really good question. And the answer is the way that the sort of the very technical energy wholesale auctions market works is that the market seems to revert to the highest price that anyone's paying. And historically, that actually was the renewable energy price. But now, at the moment, because the gas price has gone through the roof, the highest price is the gas price. And so the electricity generators are now selling up at that higher price. That, as I understand, is the answer.
And it's just a massive con. I mean, I've got Shell Energy saying we use 100% renewables, but, you know, up goes the price with everything else. So,
yep.
You know, I've got a friend in Thailand that's actually paying £18 a month for his energy. You know, a little third world country like that, and we're one of the world powers, and, you know, we're...
Lee, you've hit the nail on the head. Actually, I do understand the government is looking at this flaw in the way the energy market works, as you've just highlighted. You know, I've said the whole market is broken. The whole market is not fit for purpose. And this is urgent.
And this is the other thing. I mean, when petrol goes up, gas goes up, so does their profits. Why is it the government can't cap them at, say, 5% or 10%?
Well,
and the surplus all goes back to us to cheap prices.
That's what happens in wartime, is that the government controls the pricing of production of critical goods, in this case energy, and it could do that. That's my whole plan, Lee.
Yeah. Yeah, no,
Brilliant.
I'm not taking the hat off to you, but what are our government doing for
It's a shambles, Lee, but enjoy the rest of the bank holiday weekend. Thanks for calling. That was Lee in Essex, his concerns, and there are some real flaws in the way the energy market works. Let's go up to North Warwickshire, where Ian is on the line. Hi, Ian.
Hello there.
Hi, what's on your mind?
Well, I was listening to your little bit talking about the nuclear power stations. I was just wondering why it is we have so much trouble getting sites. We've got all these brownfield sites where the coal-fired power stations were, which have got access to the national grid. Why don't they site these small nuclear power stations there? But, you know, you've already got a brownfield site, you've got access to the national grid, and usually they have no water where they've got cooling.
It's a great, practical, sensible, common-sense point, Ian, which means, of course, sadly, that civil servants won't adopt it. The reality is... some of those sites are there, and I think Angela Knight just did refer to it. Completely, that opportunity is there, and that's surely one of the logical answers, isn't it?
Definitely, and I think there shouldn't be any objections because everyone wants the power.
That's right, and I think that there is a clear shift. Everyone realises just how important cheap, affordable power is because it drives the price of everything. If you've got cheaper power, all of a sudden, inflation comes down, the price of everything goes down, and that has to be the way forward.
Exactly. And the other thing to think of is using gas to make electricity. You're using one form of energy to make another form of energy, and every time you do that, you have inefficiencies built in, so you use 100% gas and you get 8% electricity from it.
And there's some truth to that. The thing is, though, that gas is reliable, Ian, whereas obviously sometimes the wind doesn't blow, and at that point, you know, suddenly the renewables, the wind turbines are pretty useless.
Exactly. Wind turbines and, of course, solar only works during the day.
It only works during the day, whereas nuclear is completely reliable and predictable, as long as you maintain it, unlike the French. Ian, great call. Thank you so much. We're going to head quickly up to Glasgow, where David is on the line. David, do tell me, first of all, are the Glasgow bin men on strike as well, or is it just in Edinburgh?
Oh, Richard, that's good morning, by the way. That's a whole issue, that's...
I know. Sorry, I've disturbed you. What was on your mind?
No, I would like to be a bit more positive.
Good.
Particularly in our position outside Europe, right? I would like to talk about the production of hydrogen. The Energy Networks Association, various bodies, etc., have said that we're able to produce 20% nitrogen into the gas network by next year. Many manufacturers of boilers are in the process of producing nitrogen-ready boilers, which work either on natural gas or nitrogen. And then when you look at the offshore rigs, the industry has said it's possible to take some of the rigs, for instance, that are being decommissioned and convert them into hydrogen production stations.
Yes, you're so right, David. That's my understanding. Yeah. You could put 20% hydrogen quite quickly, but at the moment, it is just super urgent.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, Richard. There's loads of things that we could do, VAT, etc. That's why I'm saying I'm trying to be a bit more positive and say, well, what we're going to do in the years to come. Shell, for instance, here's an interesting thing. Shell in the port of Rotterdam, I think it is, are producing their own hydrogen production station, 260 megawatts, I think it is, 200 megawatts of power.
I've heard that. No, I'm with you. I'm with you, David. I've got to go to the news, David, but that is a great bit of positivity, optimism. We need more of that. It's not easy, but let's try and keep it. That was David in Glasgow. We didn't get to the answer on bins. I'll be taking more calls, more messages. After the break, we're talking to Kate Nichols of UK Hospitality. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk TV.
The thing that's really getting up my nose is how many of you moan about the fact that I have an opinion. I've been doing this for over 40 years. Of course I have an opinion. And if you get triggered or you get upset, you shouldn't watch. For the rest of us, an evening of entertainment live on TV and radio. Now, what do you want?
I don't want anything.
Thank you very much indeed.
Top class calls then.
This is Talk TV News.
Good morning, I'm Divya Kohli. Liz Truss may cut VAT by 5%, saving the average household £1,300 a year. It's her response to the cost of living crisis and a record rise of 80% on energy bills, and her plan if she becomes Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak's team has criticised the plan as expensive and regressive. No final decisions will take place until a new Tory leader is elected on September the 5th. Well, Boris Johnson has admitted energy bills will be eye-watering this winter and blamed Vladimir Putin. Writing in the Mail on Sunday, the outgoing Prime Minister claimed the Russian president is enjoying making bills higher with the war in Ukraine. But he insisted the UK's future will be golden despite difficult months ahead. Pakistan is appealing for further international support after devastating floods killed more than 1,000 people and displaced millions more. Heavy rains have hit the country since June. And NASA say they plan to land humans on the moon by 2025 and build infrastructure to keep them there for extended stays. The first launch of the new generation Artemis rocket will take place on Monday, sending an unmanned capsule around the moon and back to Earth over 6 weeks. The space agency hopes the plan to build a moon colony will smooth the way for an eventual trip to Mars, as astronaut Randolph Bresnik explained.
If you think of going to the moon as, you know, a camping expedition, and Mars being a further out camping expedition, you're not going to go out to the Alaskan wilderness with just going to the sporting goods store and buying a tent and getting your boots that are brand new out of the box. You're going to go to some local place that's a little closer that maybe, you know, you can come back to pretty quickly, come back home if your shoelaces break or something like that.
That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
Welcome back, my friends. We are halfway through Tice Talk this Sunday morning. Some great calls and messages. And Gareth has just tweeted in, love this. Richard, great callers with so much common sense. Why aren't they running the country? I have to say, no one could do as bad a job as the current bunch of civil servants and politicians, but there we are. Maybe I'm being a bit harsh. Anyway, we need to keep talking about solutions to the energy crisis. There's been nothing like enough focus on the business community, small businesses. In particular, you know, I know of 3 separate pubs, and pubs are vital to communities. We all love a good pub, don't we? So vital. I know 3 that are going to shut when their current electricity tariff comes to an end. So I'm delighted now to be joined on the show by Kate Nichols, Chief Executive of UK Hospitality, who spent so much time in the COVID lockdown crisis talking about lockdowns. Kate, a very good morning. I mean, your job seems to get harder and harder. First you were, you know, constantly on the airwaves talking about lockdowns. Now you're talking about the energy crisis. I mean, your members must just be terrified. It's so difficult.
It is an incredibly difficult situation for many of these businesses, not just pubs, it's restaurants, neighbourhood restaurants, hotels, B&Bs. 70% of our sector is independent small business, so a lot of them are family run. So this is not just a business for them, it's their livelihoods, it's their lives, it's the jobs of many people in their local communities. And as you rightly say, these are businesses at the heart of the community. If they're lost, we lose a great deal more than just those businesses. So there is much more at stake. These businesses, partly, they've been devastated by COVID. We aren't out of the COVID crisis as far as hospitality is concerned before energy has hit. And that's what makes this such a devastating situation to be facing. The business costs that they're facing, the soaring energy bills, which let's not forget are uncapped. We talked about 80% increases in domestic. My members are facing 300, 500. Today I had one that was facing 1,000% increase in their energy bills. It wipes out their viability overnight, and it means that we will lose many of these businesses unless we can get some urgent support to them.
And this is the point, though, in that none of the main political parties have put forward any solutions for the business community whatsoever. Yes, there's talk of a freeze on the cap for domestic, but we all know with where prices are, that's so incredibly expensive. My concern is they're all focusing on the next few months, thinking that this could be solved quickly and then the prices go back to normal. We have to plan for the worst, Kate, surely. And you know, the plan I put forward this week actually is a durable solution. It's uncomfortable as an entrepreneurial free market thinker to suggest we're in a sort of a war-like situation, but I think that's where we are, and your businesses are facing the horrors of just not being able to survive.
Absolutely. We've got these businesses through. We've invested taxpayers' money to support these businesses through 2 years of lockdown when they couldn't open. And now the cruelest of ironies is that they are going to be made unviable overnight, many thousands of them, simply through energy bills that are not their fault. So these are good, viable businesses. It's the 4th largest industrial sector in the UK. It's the 3rd largest private sector employer. If we allow hospitality businesses to fail, the knock-on effect across the supply chain, across our high streets, across our communities will be significant, and you will see many hundreds of thousands of jobs lost on the back of it. So you're right, economic pain will be far longer lasting and will outlive the energy crisis that we're facing today. That's why you're right, we need immediate, medium-term and long-term solutions to get businesses through this.
And you've mentioned a number there of hundreds of thousands of jobs. You know, I said this will be at least 500,000 jobs from small businesses if this isn't sorted. There's suggestions in some of the papers today, Kate, that the Liz Truss campaign, if she wins, would cut VAT from 20% to 15%. Would that help your businesses? Because, or actually, is that just a cash flow issue? It's not actually going to reduce their costs, or is it?
It's not going to reduce their costs, but it would certainly help with their cash flow. It would help with their margin. It would help to insulate consumers against further cost rises, because every time you have an energy bill change, you're seeing costs going up to consumers. We would really like the next government to reverse the April tax increase, where they put VAT up in our sector from 12.5% to 20%. That would have a bigger impact, but 5% would help to boost disposable income, but it needs to come alongside measures to help business costs and reduce business costs, because if we don't get the cost of doing business down, we are not going to get the cost of living down, and we're not going to tackle inflation.
I mean, it's really hard to see any good news out there. What sort of level of trade is the hospitality sector, the sort of businesses, the pubs, leisure, seeing compared, for example, to 12 months ago? Is it broadly level, or is it already down as people try to save money? What's going on?
It's broadly flat from where we were sort of 12 months ago upon reopening. We had a reopening bounce, but at the moment we're around 90% of pre-COVID levels of revenue, pre-COVID levels of trading. In the current cost environment, our businesses would need to be doing 120, 130% of previous levels of trading just to stand still. So footfall is down. We are seeing consumers drawing in their horns, starting not to come out, not spending as much when they do come out. So as I say, we haven't got back to a steady state of pre-COVID, and these businesses are heavily indebted due to COVID. That's another area that the government could tackle to help the businesses through this cost of doing business squeeze, which is going to be intense for the next 12 to 18 months.
That's right. So that's a reference perhaps to some of the bounce-back loans where people have got to start paying them back. It's this issue of, if people knew they could see an end to it, they can then work out how to cash flow through it. But if you can't see a reasonably reliable end to this, then more and more people are just going to say, I've got to give up, I've got to throw the keys back.
I think that is the challenge that many of our businesses are facing at the moment. If you're a director of a company, you have a duty to look ahead and forecast and see whether you're a viable going concern. And if costs are only going one way, business rates are soaring, to rent is increasing, your food costs in our sector are going up by about 30 to 40%. The cost of doing business to our members in hospitality is now above 20%, and you can't pass that on to consumers. So inevitably, the margin is squeezed in the middle, and these businesses are having to make very tough choices. So at the start of this piece, you talked about a number of businesses that were handing back the keys, closing for good. We're hearing lots of members in rural and coastal communities who are saying they're going to close for the winter. So that's jobs that are going to be lost over the winter, and many more will have to hand the keys back for good because they just can't make their businesses viable.
And Kate, just whilst you've been on, I had an interesting tweet here from Rob, who says, worth mentioning, many businesses, when they want to give the keys back, they can't do so because obviously they've got a long lease that they're tied into. They're unable to get out, which essentially means the only way out of it is they have to declare bankruptcy, which is such a horrific personal thing to go through.
Absolutely, and it goes back to the fact that many of these businesses are sort of mum and pop, single-site independent businesses. They're not companies that are going bust and going into administration or able to go through an agreement to get out and exit the lease. They've got personal guarantees tied up in here, and they're living above the shop. So it really is devastating for these people who are investing in their businesses, in their local communities, and through no fault of their own find that they can't profit.
Kate, thank you so much, Kate, for your thoughts there. It's grim, it's tough, but I wish you all the best in lobbying government. That was Kate Nichols, Chief Exec of UK Hospitality. We just got time to take one call, but actually I'm being waved at by my team, who said, no, we haven't, because we have to go to the break. We'll then get back to messages and calls and tweets after that. You're listening to Tice Talk here at the home of common sense. It's Talk TV. Welcome back, my friends. We are cruising through the second hour of Tice Talk. Coming up at 12 o'clock, you do not want to miss what is going to be the climate brawl of the day, because I've got a climate enthusiast called Gerald Cutney, who'll be on the phone on Zoom from Ottawa in Canada. He was really quite rude to me after I had Brian Catt on. So we'll be having a chat with him, his thoughts, why he thinks there may be a climate catastrophe around the corner. And he will also be quite willing to take your calls and your thoughts, whether you agree or disagree with him. That's coming up at 12 o'clock. Loads of messages coming in here. One here from Angry OAP, I love it. The wind may not always blow, but the tide waits for no one. Absolutely right. Very, very good point. Another one here from Neil, who says, Richard, for businesses, it must be economical to install a diesel generator. I've been hearing more and more people talking about that. I think there's a bit of a rush on for generators, no question. So that was a message from Neil. Another one here from Anonymous. Richard, how is it possible the civil service has the power to cause long delays to passports, migrant asylum, appeals, driving licences and documentation? Has the government no control over their staff? Well, I think the simple answer is, that's from Eve actually, that the government doesn't seem to have enough control over their staff. But anyway, those are just a few thoughts, a few messages. They keep pouring in. Gary from Southampton says, I agree with fracking, wind, nuclear, but they should all be produced by nationalised companies. That's the only way to control prices. We're currently paying global prices for our oil and wind. The thing is, though, about this is that governments, they can fund things, but they're very bad at managing things. That's why I've said you need a combination of part taxpayer-owned and part private sector-owned with private sector management. That way you can get the best of both worlds. That is my view. Let's go to Sheffield to see what David's thoughts and views is. Morning, David.
Good morning to you.
What's on your mind?
Well, I think one of your previous callers touched on this regarding renewable energy and the fact that we're having to pay for renewable energy at the price we have to pay for gas-generated electricity. But I'd just like your viewers just to understand exactly how extreme this situation is. 43% of our energy comes from renewable sources. None of those sources are impacted by the price of gas. And none of those producers are subject to a windfall tax.
Yeah, obviously the quantity of renewables varies day to day, David,
on
depending...
average, it's 43%.
That is, I'll check that. That's, my understanding was last year it was in the high 20s.
No, that was from wind, from all renewable sources, biomass, solar, biomass,
yes,
solar,
correct.
Hydro and wind, it was 43%.
But they are, and of course many of them are very heavily subsidised with inflation-linked subsidies. So, for example, the Drax Power Station, which uses pellets shipped over from North America, they're subsidised to the tune of over £800 million a year.
Absolutely. So all of these producers who are not subject to rising gas prices are making astronomical profits.
Correct. They are.
None of the media want to point it out.
Correct.
Because they concentrate on oil and gas. Oil and gas producers pay 30% corporation tax, plus they've now got the windfall tax. These guys have got no windfall tax on them whatsoever.
You're absolutely right, and you're so right. The mainstream media don't want to discuss this, do they? Because, of course, it's all part of the green agenda. And so I was saying that, you know, these renewables, they should face. If they're making windfall profits, then to level things up, you should have the windfall tax. Unless you go down my solution, because we're now in what I believe is a global energy war.
I agree with you, but could I add one thing, which for your next
Just quickly.
Nobody wants to ask the question, who is benefiting strategically from the green propaganda and the green agenda? There is only one country benefiting, and that is Russia. And there is not a single word about who is financing the green agenda and the green propaganda.
Well, thank you for that, David. We do know that actually much of the funding of the anti-fracking lobby, indirectly, there's increasing evidence that it may well have come from Russia, because, of course, they wanted to sell us their gas. David in Sheffield, thank you so much for those thoughts there. Now, we're going to head overseas to what may well be a sunny Brittany in France, where John is on the line. You see, we're an international programme. Good morning, John.
Good morning, Richard. Great show again. I've been giving it some thought to what you were saying about the fracking and putting a zone, around the fracking site, which I think is a brilliant idea. But the only problem that I see, which is easily solved, is that if you say you drew a 20-mile circle round the site,
yes,
your neighbour could be getting whatever, a 20-25% discount, and you get nothing, and that would cause a little bit of friction.
Yes.
The further away from the site, the less you're affected. So what you really need is a sliding scale.
That's a very good, interesting point, John.
Yeah, and mathematically, it means that the company pays obviously less out. So basically, if it's a straight line, then they save 50% from 100% down to zero payout, or they could cover a larger area, which would please more people.
That's a really good suggestion, John, because you're saying that basically if the distance is, let's say, 5 miles, if you get 5 miles and a yard, you feel a bit disgruntled that you haven't had your 30 or 40% discount. Whereas if it's on a sort of sliding scale, you're saying that's a bit fairer.
Yes, without any doubt, and that applies to all sorts of things. But we're not talking about
John,
that. But that
there is no question. You have indeed been reflecting on it, and you've been coming up with what I want, which is practical solutions, practical answers, and the application of common sense. You should go to the top of the civil service, but sadly, they wouldn't want that, would they? John, thank you so much for your thoughts there. Lots of messages coming in. One here from Tony. Tony from Barrow and Furness. Richard, a lot of the wind farm owners in the UK are from Northern Europe. This is absolutely right, and used it to pay their pension pot. In fact, the largest owner, as I understand, of all of the offshore wind farms is a company called Ørsted, which is owned 50%, give or take, by none other than the Danish government, on behalf of Danish taxpayers who are making fortunes at the expense of British taxpayers. Brilliant. Marvellous. Thanks for that, politicians. Thanks for that, Ed Davey. Really? Chris in Newbury says, should we start a petition to strip Ed Davey of his knighthood? Again, I think people are being sensibly creative and thoughtful and reflective this morning. Let's head up to Hull, where Victor is on the line. Morning, Victor.
Morning.
Morning. What's on your mind?
Well, I've got solar panels on my roof.
Right.
And I get free electricity from those.
Yes.
And I also get payment from those.
You do now. I'm really interested in this because I'm quite focused on solar panels. How long have you had them on, Victor?
3 or 4 years.
Okay.
And I was conned when I bought them.
Right.
I was ripped off. But in the end, if you speak to an expert, is it going to be to my advantage in the future as the price goes up? And should I be able to put the price of the electricity I sell to the...
Victor, it's a great question. And if you use the energy that is generated by your panels, so if you put your washing machine on or your tumble dryer or whatever during the day, then you'll be dramatically reducing, hopefully, your energy bill. But do you know what tariff you're getting from the grid when it's exported to the grid, Victor?
4p.
4p?
4p.
That's an outrage. I'm afraid to say, Victor, you have been conned. You have been ripped off.
I know that. But when I actually bought the panels, I was actually, the bloke the company sold them, the salesman ran off with the money that I paid them.
Goodness me. So
I actually got it for half price because I was quite lucky.
Right.
But I still say that we should be looking more at solar panels and informing people the advantages of them now. I know that it's going to rocket in price, but...
You're quite right, Victor. So this is a really important point, because actually I know through other interests that for commercial users or people who put solar panels on commercial buildings now, the current price being offered, Victor, by the grid or by some of the other companies is 30 to 34 pence. Yes. And I think, and this has changed about 6 months ago, give or take, I think that actually domestic users of solar panels should also be fairly rewarded, don't you?
Yes, I do. Now, if you go back to when the Labour Party were in power and they did solar panels, I believe they index-linked the payment, and at the moment they get 55 kilowatt per hour.
Yes, so that's absolutely right. The very early ones received what was called the feed-in tariff, and it was very, very generous and index-linked. So, which is why they stopped it quite quickly, because they realised it was too generous.
Yes, that's right.
Victor, seriously, I think that lots of domestic owners of solar panels, there needs to be representations made, because you should be getting a fair deal, because at the moment you're being asked to pay huge sums, but actually you're contributing to the grid, you're helping, and frankly, you're being ripped off.
Yes, but I'm still benefiting from the panels, from the free electricity I get.
Yes.
And that's better off than people who haven't got panels.
So, Victor, has that changed the way you use electricity?
It has, but I started this before this came about. I was on about trying to save the earth and not using gas. So my aim was to stop using gas as much as possible. This was before this came on. But now I still want to cut down the use of gas as much as I can, which I'm doing at the moment. I've done it because I've got a smart meter. I've got very much easy control of what I'm doing and good control of the costs. I can see it.
Well done you, Victor. Well, there you are. That's what's happening. Solar panels are interesting. They do reduce emissions, but domestic consumers should not be ripped off like Victor there by the grid. That is something that I'm really very focused on. Lots of other messages coming in. It's one here which says that another example of Westminster taking short-term decisions. The Severn Tidal barrier would have provided electricity for all of Wales, but was cancelled by the Cameron coalition, who failed to support it. These are the sort of short-term, clueless decisions. Coming up after the news and the break, we'll be having our climate brawl with Gerald Kutney from Canada. Don't go anywhere. You can't wait. It could get noisy, and we'll be taking your calls. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk TV at the home of common sense. Stay with us.
TV, on radio, and on your smartphone. This is Talk TV. Talk TV News at 12.
Good afternoon, I'm Divya Kohli. Liz Truss may cut VAT by 5%, saving the average household £1,300 a year. It's her response to the cost of living crisis and a record rise of 80% on energy bills, and her plan if she becomes Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak's team has criticised the plan as expensive and regressive. His supporter Robert Halfon told us we need to widen our energy sources to bring prices down long term.
What we've got to do, and we've made mistakes in the past, is actually secure our energy supplies. We've got to stop what I've said for a long time, balancing environmentalism on the backs of working people. So I support fracking. I wish we had done that and not had a so-called moratorium on it. We need to increase our oil and gas supplies. We need to get our gas and oil storage facilities back up and running.
Well, the outgoing Prime Minister blames Vladimir Putin for energy bills doubling. Writing in the Mail on Sunday, Boris Johnson admitted energy bills will be eye-watering this winter. He claims the Russian president's war in Ukraine is costing British consumers. Devastating floods in Pakistan have killed more than 1,000 people and displaced millions more. Heavy rains have hit the country since June. It's now appealing for further international support. NASA say they plan to land humans on the moon by 2025 and build infrastructure to keep them there for extended stays. The first launch of the Artemis rocket will take place tomorrow, sending an unmanned capsule around the moon and back to Earth over 6 weeks. The space agency hopes the plan to build a moon colony will lead to a trip to Mars, as astronaut Randolph Bresnik explained.
If you think of going to the moon as, you know, a camping expedition and Mars being a further out camping expedition, you're not going to go out to the Alaskan wilderness with just going to the sporting goods store and buying a tent and getting your boots that are brand new out of the box. You're going to go to some local place that's a little closer that maybe you can come back to pretty quickly, come back home if your shoelaces break or something like that.
And the largest street party in Europe has returned to the streets of West London for the first time since 2019. Notting Hill Carnival was cancelled twice due to COVID restrictions, but is back and will attract around 2 million people. Carnival organisers have asked people to take part in a 72-second silence to remember those who died in the Grenfell fire. Those are the latest news headlines. Still to come, your Talk Sport update, but first, your weather.
Food and Drink sponsors Talk TV weather.
It's a rather cloudy afternoon across much of Scotland, with some rain feeding in from the northwest. Elsewhere, however, it's mostly fine, with only the odd shower possible. Taking a closer look over northern Scotland, there will be some rain this evening, with some heavier bursts likely. The rain may not have spread across the east, with Orkney and Shetland looking dry. Further south across Scotland, it should be drier, and there may be some late sunshine too. In Northern Ireland, there may still be a few lingering showers around, but for most it will be a fine end to the day. Across England and Wales, any isolated daytime showers that have developed will quickly die out, meaning it will be a mostly dry evening. Variable amounts of cloud will lead to some late evening sunshine, further outbreaks of rain for Scotland overnight, and perhaps a little for the cloudy north of England too.
Times Food and Drink sponsors Talk TV weather.
Tottenham have the chance to join Arsenal and Man City at the top of the Premier League later when they take on Nottingham Forest at the City Ground. Just 2 points separate the top two teams after an Erling Haaland hat-trick secured a sensational comeback for City yesterday at Crystal Palace, while a last-minute winner against Fulham continued Arsenal's unbeaten run, giving the Gunners 12 points out of a possible 12 4 weeks into the season. Meanwhile, Jurgen Klopp says his team had a point to prove as they thrashed Bournemouth 9-0 yesterday. It's Liverpool's first win of the season and equals the biggest ever win in the Premier League.
In the end, it was the perfect football afternoon for us, and a lot of different goal scorers, all these kind of things. So wonderful goals, fantastic situations, and we all know that we needed something like that, where we had bigger chance in other games and didn't use them.
And Max Verstappen will start the Belgian GP from 15th as he looks to charge through the pack and limit the damage after taking an engine penalty. He'll be joined by rival Charles Leclerc, who's attempting to stop the Red Bull driver running away with the championship. Lewis Hamilton will be hoping for at least a podium, with the 7-time world champion still looking for his first win of the season. That's all for now. I'll be back with more in half an hour.
I'm Tom Newton-Dunn, and this is Talk TV. The conversation starts here. If I had to describe Boris Johnson with 3 words, keeps us busy.
Welcome back, my friends, and a very good afternoon. Yes, we have raced at a great pace into the third and final hour of the show. It's been pretty lively and feisty so far, but you may not have seen anything yet, because, as you know, each week I like to have a segment on what I call climate sanity. Well, this next few minutes may turn into a bit of a climate brawl. There are people literally all over the world who have dialed in to listen to this. I've got one message. Welcome, greetings from California. They either haven't gone to bed or they've woken up especially early, and many others, because I'm delighted now to be joined, having had a gentleman called Brian Catt on the show a couple of weeks ago. From one side of the climate debate, quite rightly, I was challenged on messages to say, well, could you get someone on from the other side of the debate? And that's completely fair and proper. And I hope, in a sense, that this section gets as many views as my chat with Brian Catt got 2 weeks ago. We had over 500,000 views, and I'm delighted to welcome now, all the way on Zoom from Ottawa in Canada, is Gerald Kutney, who is a PhD in chemistry, and until recently an adjunct professor of environmental science at the University of Northern British Columbia. Not only that, I've done a bit of research, but I believe, he'll correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that Gerald is ranked 16th out of 500 on the System for Climate and Energy as one of the leading influencers online. And, you know, Gerald very much believes that climate change, I think, potentially is a growing risk of catastrophe, but we'll get into that. Gerald, a very good, well, it's morning to you. I think it's about 7 in the morning. Thank you for waking up early. It's good afternoon here. But, Gerald, I think you picked up on my debate with Brian Catt, and it's fair to say that you were pretty punchy about coming back at me. The message you said was that I was disgraceful for even giving Brian Catt airtime. Gerald, do you believe in free speech?
I believe in free speech, but you also have to look at the credibility of the free speech is. I think it's important when we talk about important issues like climate change, that the people to discuss it have some credibility if they're going to criticize it.
But surely that's not free speech, Gerald. I mean, well, you know, there are some people who are obviously very highly qualified, but the rest of us should be allowed to be able to debate it, shouldn't we?
Oh, you can debate anything you'd like, but no one has to pay attention to it. Credibility is everything in an issue like this. It's too important for uncredible opinions to criticize science. Science criticizes itself, and everyone can have an opinion. I totally agree with that, but it doesn't mean anything.
But the point is that science is never settled, is it, Gerald? I mean, science evolves because scientists, quite properly, challenge each other's conclusions. And, of course, evidence changes over time. So, you know, science is never settled.
That's a fair point. I totally agree with that. But one thing that science is accepted. And what that means is a theory is accepted by the greater scientific community until new evidence suggests otherwise, if that ever happens.
Okay, but you, for example, just recently there's a new group called Clintel with over 1,000 scientists and experienced professionals who signed up to it, you know, putting a different point of view, some very eminent and credible people within that. It seems to me that your approach to this debate is that, in a sense, you're not allowed to debate it or talk about it unless you're highly qualified and agree with your line of opinion.
My point is there is no debate over the science.
Of course there is. There's always debate about science. That's the definition of science. It
not the science of climate change. It's not at all. Again, you confuse the idea of someone with an unqualified opinion versus new evidence that suggests the science is wrong. Again, people can argue all they want, but that doesn't change the science. The science is clear. It's been clear about climate change for over 3 decades.
So what science are you referring to there, Gerald?
I'm talking about that climate change is real. It's mainly caused by us, and it's something that we need to deal with urgency.
And but do you think, so therefore, do you think I'm a denier, Gerald?
Yeah, I do.
Really?
Yes.
How long has climate change gone on for, Gerald?
The typical climate denier question is that climate change has been changing forever. But what makes the current climate change special is that this time is caused by us. It's taking place at a rate that's never been seen before. And so why that's important is if it's caused by us, then we can stop it.
Okay, so you think I've been to deny. Gerald, what car do you drive? Do you drive an electric car?
I wish I did, but no, I don't. And
so you drive a fossil-fueled car?
I do.
Really? Do you know what car I drive, Gerald?
No, I don't.
Have a guess.
I hope it's an EV.
I drive an electric vehicle.
Excellent.
Have you invested in any solar panels, Gerald, to reduce emissions?
No, I have not.
You've not? So,
no.
You haven't... So, in a sense, you're saying the science is settled and you presume it's a catastrophe, and yet you don't have an electric car and you haven't invested in solar panels. I've got an electric car. I've invested in hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of solar panels that are saving hundreds of tons of CO2 every single year. How dare you accuse me and smear me and label me for being a denier when I'm doing more to reduce emissions than you are?
So I'll take it back if you say that you agree that climate change is real and is caused by us and we have to do something to tackle it.
Gerald, I've always said that climate change has existed since the year dot, and it will continue to exist. And I'm a fan of reducing emissions because I want cleaner, quieter cities. I live in them, and that's what I mean. What I'm not convinced about is that we're facing a climate catastrophe, and hopefully you can correct me if I'm wrong, but no one's presented any science to me that shows that if we get to net zero, if we get there, that's going to make any difference to climate change, which is affected by things that are much, much bigger than CO2.
No, that's not true. If we get to net zero, it's not going to improve it. It's going to stop it from becoming worse. And that's the scary part of climate change. Just answer this one quick question for me. Do you agree that climate change today is mainly caused by humans?
Look, actually, no, I don't. I think that things like solar variability, things like sea level oscillation, things like volcanic activity, both above ground and in the ocean, have a much, much bigger impact, as they always have done for millions of years, than the quantity of man-made CO2. There's no question. You're absolutely right. CO2 levels have increased. But, Gerald, the temperature that we face at the moment, we're about 1% warmer than the coldest point in the last 10,000 years. We're still 2 degrees colder than the warmest point in the last 10,000 years.
I'm not quite sure those stats are correct, but I do appreciate your candor when you're describing how you feel about climate change. But just to get back, by definition, that is the definition of a climate denier. Science does not agree with you. There is no science in the peer-reviewed literature that supports that modern climate change is caused by volcanoes or the sun. That's the rhetoric of climate denialism.
But I've literally proven to you that I'm not a denier, and yet you still try and smear and label me as a denier.
Climate denier is in a sphere. It's simply a fact. What climate denier means is someone who challenges the accepted science. I've summarized the accepted science to you.
You haven't told me anything about the accepted science. You've just said that it's accepted and it's settled. Science is never settled, and you've given no proof whatsoever, no facts to back up your point.
What I stated is accepted science remains accepted until new evidence suggests otherwise. There has not been any new evidence in the modern age of climate science, which has extended over half a century. Every decade, the evidence has become stronger and stronger that the science I briefly summarized to you is correct.
So what's interesting here is that you call yourself a climate scientist, and you use social media essentially to try and smear and label people, and you accuse us of disinformation and propaganda, but you're only talking about facts in the last 50 to 100 years or so, since sort of the industrialization period. But I'm looking back at science and data from ice cores and things that goes back 10,000 years plus. So it feels to me that even though I'm not a qualified scientist, I actually think that I'm applying more rigor to the data than you are.
I'm sure you do feel that way. But if you look at the information that you've got that from climate scientists. And climate scientists know in the far distant past, you can go back millions of years if you want to. But when you look at modern climate change, which is the most important to us because we are living that now, we are suffering the consequences of the climate crisis now. Science is clear. It is mainly caused by us.
So what are the consequences that concerns you about rising CO2 levels that we should be so terrified of, Gerald?
The big thing about climate change, which what the word says itself, is the climate is changing, and the big effect is that extreme weather events become more common and more severe. You've seen that in Europe with the major drought that's caused water levels to decrease along the major rivers throughout Europe and in other countries as well.
But we've had droughts and floods before, Gerald. 100 years ago, 96% more people died from extreme weather events than now, because guess what? We're smart, we're intelligent, we work out how to adapt and mitigate.
The stats you're giving are ones that are famous for Lombard for showing up. They're very misleading.
Someone's either dead or they're not dead. How can that be misleading?
The point is that for weather events, extreme weather events, they are more severe and more common than they were in the past. You're showing out statistics that are complicated by many other factors. The important thing is, look at the science. Climate science is clear. It increases the frequency and the severity of extreme weather events.
Gerald, this is brilliant. We're getting loads of messages coming in. We've got to take a break because without the breaks, we can't pay everybody for the adverts. Hang on, don't go anywhere from Ottawa in Canada. This is Gerald Courtney. We've got some calls to ask some questions for Gerald. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk TV. Welcome back, my friends. After the quick ad break, we are in the middle of the climate brawl, and I'm delighted to be joined all the way from Ottawa in Canada by Gerald Kutney, who is a PhD in chemistry and a very, very influential climate online influencer. Gerald, welcome back. Thanks for being with us. We're having a hearty, robust discussion and debate, which is healthy. And I'm delighted that we've got a couple of calls, a couple of tweets come in, Gerald. Some sort of focus, some a little bit sharp. But one here is quite entertaining. I'm going out to see my plants grow, enjoying the CO2. I've got Dennis in Cardiff on the line who's got a question for you, Gerald. I hope you'll be able to hear it. Dennis, good afternoon. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I would like to know, look, I'm a layman with all this, and I don't really look at it that much. But I've looked at it, and I have 10 scientists tell me the science says it's definitely going to be a catastrophe. And then I have another 10 saying that it's not. How do I make my mind up here?
Great question. Did you hear that, Gerald?
Yes, I did, and it is a great question. And that's where the propaganda from the fossil fuel industry has confused the average person immensely. When you say 10 scientists, what scientists are you talking about? The scientific opinion that's important is what's in the peer-reviewed literature. And they are from the leading climate scientists and experts in the world. It's not 10 to 10. It's not 75 to 25. It's virtually almost all climate scientists state what I've been showing here on the show. The amount of so-called contrarians are a handful. I can count them on one hand. But that has been distorted by the publicity of the list you mentioned, for example, from Clientele. They're not a scientific organization. If you look at that list, the number of climate so-called scientists on it are trivial. And so when you look at the situation, I'll repeat this again, climate science is clear. The science of climate change is accepted, and it'll remain to be accepted until new evidence suggests otherwise.
Well, that's a good point, actually, Gerald. And Dennis, thank you for that great question. I've got another question coming shortly. But do you accept, Gerald, that scientists can occasionally possibly be wrong?
No, of course the scientists can be wrong. But the advantage of the scientific method is it's self-correcting. Let's say a scientist publishes a paper and it's wrong. The scientific community will react to it and a correction will be made to it. So science, by definition, is self-correcting. And so we're also talking about a scientist or 100 scientists. We're talking about tens of thousands of scientists around the world that do research in the climate sciences that are stating what I've been showing.
So talk about the evidence. Joe, back in the 1970s, the consensus of scientists were concerned that we were going into a period of cooling, an ice age, and it turns out that consensus was completely wrong.
There was never a consensus about global cooling. What there was in the 1970s is the world was slightly cooling because two factors were happening. One was global warming, and another one was global cooling caused by aerosols. There was debate among the scientific community in the early 70s of which one would dominate. But there never was a consensus in the scientific community about global cooling.
And then in 2017, Gerald, there was a consensus amongst the experts that the Great Barrier Reef was damaged beyond repair in terms of coral cover. And yet here we are 5 years later, and we've got record levels, joyous, happy, wonderful news of record coral cover on the Great Barrier Reef, which shows the consensus of experts were wrong.
I'm not sure about the consensus on the coral reef. Certainly there was a lot of publicity out there that it was in serious trouble. That recent information is encouraging.
Encouraging, great. We've got another question here, from Rob in Petersfield. Good afternoon, Rob. Hi, what's your question for Gerald?
It's relatively simple. I'm prepared to accept his climate science. But with that climate science, what is being ignored, I'm prepared to accept that man is exacerbating it. But What is he now doing about population growth, which in 1804 was 1 billion, in 1927 was 2 billion, in 1974 was 4 billion, and it hits 8 billion at the end of this year, beginning of next.
Okay. Did you hear that, Gerald?
Yes, I did. And certainly population growth has been a concern for many people for a long period of time. You certainly cannot separate it from all environmental problems. I'm not an expert in that area. It's one thing I don't follow closely, but some of the most recent evidence suggests that by the middle of this century, the population growth is going to start leveling off. It's a little bit of a distraction from climate change overall. You and I or nobody can control the population growth. But I think that what we have to focus on is what we can do to stop the climate crisis, not in factors that we
How
can't.
can it be a distraction? How can it be a distraction when we have doubled the population in 50 years? That's the period which you are saying is the climate science is right. And yet ultimately what you want us to do is trust the global government who couldn't control the virus with more taxpayers' money to control the climate.
I feel your frustration. I'm not so sure there's such a thing called a global government. I've certainly never seen it the way the world...
Not government, government.
Yep. Great question, Rob. Thank you for that. And that's an answer. I think the point there, Gerald, that I would say is that billions of people are leading longer, happier, healthier lives because of cheap energy provided by fossil fuels. Let's take a call from Cheltenham, where Alex is on the line. Alex, what's your question for Gerald?
I guess where Gerald said that people that challenge science are just deniers, I thought that was the role of scientists, to challenge the current scientific opinion. I mean, Charles Darwin, when he came up with the theory of evolution, he was challenging the current opinion.
Great question.
Isaac Newton, when he came up with gravity, was challenging the current opinion. In fact, every famous scientist was challenging current opinion.
Great question, Alex. Gerald, what's the answer? We've only got a minute and a half.
It was a good question. Science should always be challenged, but it's challenged by observations, by evidence, by the facts, not by opinion.
But the observations of fact and the evidence from the ice cores, for example, in Greenland, shows that actually over the last 10,000 years, we've had much warmer periods than we've currently got. But you seem to ignore that evidence.
It does not show much warmer periods. And as I stated before, we're focusing on modern climate change, which is what's important to us today.
But why aren't you concerned about the evidence of what happened before, that actually man survived quite happily in warmer periods?
What we're talking about is you're talking about evidence that comes from the climate sciences. But if you look at the IPCC reports, it includes such evidence and it's taken into account.
Gerald, I'm one of the sound people that's read the report. Page 41, D1.6 says that even if you get to net zero tomorrow, it'll make no difference to sea level rise for over 200 years.
And as I stated before, the problem is if we don't stop it, it'll keep on getting worse. Net zero allows the problem to stop getting worse.
Well, Gerald, we've had a great debate. We could go on. We'll get you back on because I think this is important to have debate. I believe in free speech. You've been a great guest on this climate sanity, this climate brawl. Gerald Courtney from Ottawa. This is an international show. We've got loads of messages and tweets coming in. Thank you so much for all of that. I think it's important to discuss this. Let's have a healthy debate and get to the real answers, if we can. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk TV.
The thing that's really getting up my nose is how many of you moan about the fact that I have an opinion. I've been doing this for over 40 years. Of course I have an opinion. And if you get triggered or you get upset, you shouldn't watch. For the rest of us, an evening of entertainment live on TV and radio. Now, what do you want?
I don't want anything.
Thank you very much indeed.
Top class calls there.
This is Talk TV News.
Good afternoon, I'm Divya Kohli. Police have made a fresh appeal for information to find the killer of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell. She was killed in her own home in Liverpool on Monday. 2 men were arrested on suspicion of murder but have been released on bail. One of them has been recalled to prison for breaching the terms of his licence. Detectives released this video earlier today.
We've got a 9-year-old girl who won't celebrate her 18th birthday. She won't celebrate her wedding. She won't have children of her own. If you've got information and you're withholding it. You're protecting the killers.
Liz Truss may cut VAT by 5%, saving the average household £1,300 a year. It's her response to the cost of living crisis and a record rise of 80% on energy bills, and her plan if she becomes Prime Minister. Rishi Sunak's team has criticised the plan as expensive and regressive, while the outgoing Prime Minister blames Vladimir Putin for energy bills doubling. Writing in the Mail on Sunday, Boris Johnson admitted energy bills will be eye-watering this winter. He claims the Russian president's war in Ukraine is costing British consumers. Devastating floods in Pakistan have killed more than 1,000 people and displaced millions more. Heavy rains have hit the country since June. It's now appealing for further international support. And the largest street party in Europe has returned to the streets of West London for the first time since 2019. Notting Hill Carnival was cancelled twice due to COVID restrictions, but is back and will attract around 2 million people. Carnival organisers have asked people to take part in a 72-second silence to remember those who died in the Grenfell fire. That's all for now. We'll have more in half an hour.
Welcome back, my friends. Good afternoon to Tice Talk. Wow, that was a fun half an hour. I found that most enjoyable, most illuminating. I hope you did too. Loads and loads of messages pouring in. And it was very spirited of Gerald to come on and accuse me of being a denier and all sorts. But I think it's fair to say that not many people agree with the evidence that he seems to have put forward. But anyway, keep those calls coming in 0344 499 1000 about that. And I'm going to keep this debate coming in because I think it's really important. Let's hear both sides of the debate, then people can make up their mind. But free speech is all about having a debate. And we need now, in our sort of final subject of the day, to have a discussion, of course, about health and the state of our healthcare system, because more and more people are losing confidence in what's going on with the NHS in so many different bits of it. In particular, we've got A&E waiting times, we've got ambulance waiting times, and we've got, unbelievably, we've got a senior consultant saying that actually beg, borrow, save, scrimp in order to go private. So I'm delighted now to be joined by a former chair of an NHS trust, Martin Gower. Good afternoon. Thanks for joining me on Tice Talk. These are incredibly difficult times, aren't they, for our healthcare system in general, in that we've got a real sort of crisis of confidence in ambulance, is whether or not they're going to turn up at a sensible time frame, how quickly you may or may not get through A&E, cancer waiting lists. I mean, has it ever been more serious?
I don't think it has, Richard, and thanks for having me on. I think at the moment almost everything that could be a challenge and a problem to the NHS is there. And what we're seeing is obviously the impact of the lockdown period, when people who should have gone to their healthcare providers didn't, because they felt they were saving the NHS. We're seeing the absenteeism of staff, still to some degree due to COVID, but due to stress and all sorts of other things. So there's a problem with staff absence due to sickness. There's a problem of people leaving the NHS, retiring. And I think it is predominantly a staff problem. If you add to that the awful condition of a lot of the estate in the NHS, I mean, they're really some really ghastly places which need to be sort of knocked down and started again virtually. The issues with social care, 160,000 people light in social care. It's pretty much, if you had to set out to design a bad situation, you could hardly do better than that we've got at the moment.
So it's sort of a perfect storm, and in multiple areas, some of which are related and some of which clearly are not. The one that hits the press a lot at the moment is ambulance waiting times and A&E, and there's a suggestion that the NHS has actually misled people in terms of A&E waiting times. depending on the way that they calculate them. I guess rather than get focused on the sort of technicalities of it, what's the answer? You said it's a sort of a staff issue. Is it the quality of the people who are tasked with resolving some of these challenges that are not finding the solutions?
To some degree, but I think at the end they haven't got enough staff. There's a very high vacancy rate in the NHS across virtually all disciplines. And one of the problems, Richard, is that when you have that situation, you tend to go to agency staff. And I know a lot of agency staff do a good job, but they're very expensive. And also, it's not quite the same as having your own team on board. You know, it's a bit like if you're building something and all your people are subcontractors, you know, you haven't got quite the control and, if you like, the motivation that you need to get the people working to their best. And they try hard. I'm not criticising the agency workers who come in, but it's not a great situation. I mean, Richard, the problem we've got in the NHS is that all the things that need to happen now, they're urgent, they're required now, but actually they're doing nothing to resolve the long-term issues that the NHS is suffering. And if we look at some of the things in the perfect storm, these have been caused by things that have been happening over the last 20 years.
This is what's so frustrating. I mean, like, for example, the cap on the numbers of new doctors that we're training in our universities, for example. James Cleverly the other day, he was on, currently Education Secretary. He had no answer for that whatsoever. I mean, it just seems simple to me. You just got to lift the cap.
Yes, you have got to lift the cap, but if you lifted it today, you're talking about the impact of the NHS in maybe 7, 8, 9 years' time. So there are things that need to happen now, and which, as I said, conflict with some of the things that need to be done longer term. I mean, one of the issues that happened in last week's, I think it was in the Telegraph or the Times, where somebody was pleading that people should go private, you know, beg, borrow or steal. Actually, it's somewhat frustrating when people are told that they've got to wait 20 weeks for treatment, and then they say if they go private, you can get it done in 3 or 4 weeks, and then they meet the same doctor that they met at the NHS who will give the treatment.
Completely. But what that proves is, Martin, that proves that there is, and I understand, particularly in the world of cancer, there is plenty of capacity in the private sector that surely the NHS should be hoovering up and buying 24/7 operational capacity to get through the lists.
Well, there's two issues there, Richard. One is that politically you will get a lot of people clacking about using the private sector. Now, in fact, I've got a figure here. In 2021, the NHS commissioned private sector providers to the tune of 18 billion. So right back when I left the NHS in mid-2020, there was a lot of services being commissioned in the private and indeed in the third sector then. So let's not get carried away. GPs are all in the private sector virtually. They are private sector SMEs. But people will always go on and say, "Oh, you're going to want the American system."
But actually, it's interesting, Martin, because I think that may be shifting. And the main reason I say that is I heard Wes Streeting, who's the Shadow Health Secretary, on a couple of weeks back, and he said, and this is quite extraordinary, it didn't get much pickup, he said that they should be using more private sector capacity to get through the list, which of course is what the Blair government did in the early noughties.
It's true, but of course the more you use the private sector with the present setup, the more you reduce the capacity in the NHS. Because if doctors are spending more of their time working in the private sector rather than doing their NHS work, you're inevitably going to move towards the private sector. Personally, my view has always been that we needed to draw a line between if you like, the insurance element of the NHS, which is free at the point of delivery. We could retain that, but engage with the private sector to a far greater degree.
Brilliant.
But we will get a lot of political fallout.
That's
the Wes Streeting comment is interesting. I'll agree.
Martin, that's what leadership and determination and courage is all about, and we need it within our politicians. Thank you so much, Martin Gower, former chair of an NHS trust, for his thoughts and practical solutions, as well as identifying the problems and the challenges. Let's go quickly, just before the next break, to Bolton, where Matthew's on the line. Hi, Matthew.
Hi, Richard. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm all right. What's on your mind?
Just sat outside with a nice cup of Lancashire tea.
Ah, that sounds delicious. A Lancashire brew.
Yeah, no Yorkshire tea. They're too walk. They went too walk Yorkshire tea.
Indeed, indeed. What's your question or observation?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, are we really going to listen to the scientists on climate change after the past record on COVID? I mean, they're really the people we want to be listening to, are they?
This is the thing, isn't it? You've got climate scientists, you've got medical scientists.
And look where we are where we are due to a lot of the policies and so-called information.
I mean, the tragedy is that we're seeing the collateral damage of the lockdown fanatics, and that was the consensus. And again, funnily enough, people like me who dared to challenge it, we were smeared, we were labelled, we were called killers.
Well, there was only the Barrington Declaration that attempted to put any sanity across, and they were prevented. But where were all these scientists offering the alternative point of view? I didn't see them.
That's right. And those brave people who did that Barrington Declaration, you know, they were really targeted. They even have death threats. Just shocking. Matthew, great call. Thank you so much for that. That's Matthew in Bolton with his quite correct observation that, you know, sometimes the experts and the scientists, they get it wrong. Quick tweet here from Mitch. I'd wager a tidy sum that when the scientists of the Great Barrier Reef said it was irreversibly damaged, Gerald Courtney did not challenge that claim. He was wrong about that, and he's wrong about other things. There we go. Mitch in North London. Stay with us. Coming up at 1 o'clock, of course, there's the great Peter Cardwell. He is back. It's Tice Talk. It's Talk TV. Welcome back, my friends, to Tice Talk. We're into the last 15 minutes before Peter Cardwell takes you through until 4 o'clock when the amazing Kevin O'Sullivan is back. But we've still got time for lots of messages, tweets pouring in about my climate brawl chat with Gerald Courtney from Ottawa. I have to say, many people feel that he didn't provide any backup, any data, any evidence to highlight his side of the debate. And actually, it turns out that me as a denier, I'm actually doing more to reduce emissions that he's so concerned about than he is. Is that hypocrisy? Or maybe I'm overstating it. Let's go to London, where David is on the line. Hi, David.
Hi, Richard. Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yeah, great. Loud and clear. Go for it. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Richard, from my own perspective, the government have lost control because roads are being closed in the name of climate-safe streets. You know, it's as if, Richard, the government can fix the climate overnight. But this is causing huge stress to people who live in neighbouring streets because they are getting all of the displaced traffic.
You're so right, absolutely. And this is going on all over the country, isn't it? Councils that just impose these low-traffic neighbourhood things, they're a nightmare.
It's a dictatorship, Richard, and people are protesting, but the government and the councils just don't seem to care. And drivers are being stuck in traffic because of this nonsense, and it's creating traffic, it's creating more pollution. We're just going backwards.
You're so right. And of course, if you've got more traffic, then you've got more fumes, and that means more emissions.
And you can't fix the climate overnight, Richard. That's what I find so ridiculous, you know?
No. And climate change goes on forever. David, great call. Thank you so much indeed. It is frustrating. We've got loads of more tweets coming in here. Let's just see. Oh, my goodness me, that's just too awful. I think quite a lot of people just felt that on that climate ball that Gerald just... He had no backup except to say that science was settled and I was wrong and anybody else is a denier. I think that's the point, is they're trying to sort of prevent debate. And where did we last see that? Oh, yes, I remember. It was lockdowns. Well, that went well, didn't it? Let's go back to Essex, where Peter's on the line. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Richard. Yeah, I found the other day, you know, when you put things away and you forget about them, I found a copy, and I'm pretty sure it was a Sunday Express from back in the 80s.
Right.
And the headline is Hot House Britain. And what it's basically saying is climate scientists say that the South Coast will have the same climate as the south of France and Spain by the end of the century, which obviously didn't happen. And even more importantly, how's your memory, Richard?
Well, at my age, it's beginning to slip a bit. I've got to be honest, Peter.
Do you remember 20 years ago when we were told, and this was on the BBC, that the world would warm by 3.5 degrees in 7 years, all the ice would melt at the North Pole, and places like the Azores would disappear?
Yeah, I'm funny that. And what's happening?
I think scientists, basically, my opinion is scientists lie for money. And for 20 years it was global warming, and now it's climate change because the world wasn't warming. It hasn't warmed that much.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? That actually a lot of these people make a lot of money by consulting, by selling books, catastrophizing.
By finding discoveries, by saying, oh, the world's coming to the end next week and, you know, you got to do this, that and the other. And people pay them money for discovering this. So what do you expect?
Well, there we are. Peter, it's a great call, great thoughts. And I'd love to see that article from the 1980s. If you can send that in or send us a copy online, that'd be fantastic, just to see that. I've got a copy of the Radio Times in the 1974 that said the front page of it was, beware, Ice Age coming. I'm still waiting, folks. Anyway, let's go to Blackpool, where Sandra's on the line. Hi, Sandra.
Hello, good afternoon, Richard. I just wanted to call because I'm so frustrated with these scientists. We've just lived through 3 years of COVID. We've had projections, lies, agendas, and I don't believe any of it. And now we've got the climate change people doing exactly the same. I'm sure they've got their own agendas. I'm sure it's all money motivated. And it's just driving me round the twist.
Look, I think it's, to be honest, Sandra, it's driving a lot of people around the twist.
So, you know, we adapt. We've been here for hundreds of thousands of years. As things change, the human race adapts. And I don't see what all the big fuss is about.
You're so right, because guess what? we're intelligent, we're smart. Most of the time, you know, we should learn the lessons of mistakes we've made, try not to make those same mistakes again. And if we're worried about a bit of sea level rise, then guess what? You build some sea level defences. It's not rocket science, is it, Sandra?
No, it's exactly the truth. And the other thing that, you know, one other thing that's really bugging me is that a few years ago when I found out we were getting our fuel, if you like, from Russia, I just threw my hands up in the air and said, who needs a world war? Just turn the power off.
There you are. You were ahead of the...
I'm getting a feeling of deja vu.
Yeah, I'm afraid. Well, you were smart and ahead of the curve because, Sandra, you applied common sense. Thank you so much indeed for your call. Loads more messages coming in. A wonderful one from here. Angry OAP is firing them in. Here says, Richard, if CO2 is the problem, why not just plant some more trees? No need for the green levy. Angry OAP is on the money. And interestingly, actually, guess what? NASA photographs show that the world has got usefully greener over the last 30 or 40 years. I wonder why. Do you think that could be because there's a bit more of a natural fertiliser called CO2? Maybe that's a good thing. Let's go to Hereford for the last call of the day, where Heather is on the line. Hi, Heather.
Well, thank you, yes. Well, what we have, and have always had, is 2 tides a day around the whole world. And the power in the sea is enormous. And the whole world could be running on this. We never lose power, ever. But why I rang is because I'm cross and annoyed to think that people eulogise over the different prime ministers that we have and think they're so wonderful, but they are not wonderful. Their brain is no better than ours, and I don't see why important decisions are left up to them. We need more people on board when these issues come, you know, have to be decided upon. I don't think it's right, you know?
Heather, you are so right. You can't just rely on one Prime Minister and, you know, no one's perfect. They make mistakes. They need a great team around them, don't they, Heather?
Well, they do, and the civil service needs more people to give them, you know, to sit down and discuss issues like 24/7 round the clock until they come up with the right decision to advise the government on.
That's right.
You know,
and, of course, our civil service used to be the envy of the world, but I think, to be honest, given some of the things that's gone on recently, Heather, a lot of people's confidence, myself included, has dramatically reduced in that quality. Are you in that field?
Well, yes, and I mean, you cannot have people working at home trying to feed the cat and mind the baby when they're supposed to be doing important matters. It's ridiculous.
Well, there we are. That's another whole debate about working from home, Heather. But thank you for that great call. Talking of great things and great people who should be doing more to help this great country. Yes, he's back straight from yesterday's show. Peter Cardwell is in the studio. Good afternoon, Peter.
Good afternoon, Richard. What
lovely to be handed over.
What a lovely introduction. Thank you very much.
Well, there we are. How are you? I haven't seen you for ages.
I know it's been a long time, and I was filling in for you last week. So
Thank you so much for doing that. I had a great holiday, and I know you did an awesome job.
Thank you.
People loved it, and yeah, I mean, so I don't know if you heard earlier, but I had quite a debate with a gentleman from Ottawa about climate science.
Yes,
because,
I did hear it. Yeah, really interesting.
And really, because I had someone a couple of weeks ago, and Gerald, and that was quite interesting.
Yeah,
but it turns out, me, as someone who's not a catastrophizer, it turns out I'm reducing emissions more than he is.
Wow, how are you doing that?
Because I've got an electric car and I'm installing solar panels on my buildings. He didn't even have an electric car. Anyway.
Although I do wonder, with so many people having electric cars, with the price of electricity, you know, how affordable are they going to be, which is really interesting as well. It's another big debate, I think, around all that.
It is another big debate. There's no question about that. Anyway, what's on your show for the next 3 hours?
Filling in for Trisha Goddard, so it's going to be a slightly different show today. We're talking about the energy price cap and what can be done from a personal finance perspective. We're also talking about faith in the news. Do you believe in miracles?
Well, at the moment, I'd like to, actually. I'd like to be an optimist, Peter, because at the moment, some people are saying we need a miracle.
Well, I know what you mean. So we're talking about whether miracles are a thing with 3 different faith leaders. Got Rabbi on as well, which is very exciting. Slightly different for me as well.
That'll get some calls coming in.
I would hope so, yeah, definitely. We're also talking about why so many of us are feeling sick with winter bugs, yet it's still the summer, and we're also going to be looking at the final furlong. It's gone on all summer, gone on forever, the Conservative leadership election. So we're nearly there. We're nearly there.
I'd actually,
another 9 days or something.
8 days to go.
8 days.
I'd tried to forget about it because I've sort of just mentally parked it.
Zoned out.
I'm so cross it had taken so long. I'd completely and utterly zoned out. Don't go anywhere, folks. It's going to be a great 3 hours ahead. Do you believe in miracles? Let Peter Cardwell know, because he's on for the next 3 hours. Then it's Kelvin O'Sullivan. I'm back. I'm back.